The story kicks off with a man falling as he flashes back to his painful past, where he was raised all alone in an orphanage. He fought tooth and nail to get where he was and dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of justice. But not everything went the way he wanted. As it turned out, reality was a cruel mistress, throwing a pile of documents in his face and shattering his expectations. Because of this, he ended up butting heads with his boss, who screamed at him, calling him crazy for wanting to go against the system. Right after, his superior gets closer and tells him to listen carefully, calling our protagonist Prosecutor Seo Gayong. The older man then asks who pays the taxes that fund his salary, implying it's not the common folk. Faced with the situation, the boss says that even a dog doesn't bite the hand that feeds it, and tells him to bury the case once and for all. With a clenched fist, Seo Gayong asks if paying a lot of taxes gives someone the right to commit crimes. Our MC keeps talking, asking who wrote a law like that, because he's going to lock that scumbag up too. At that, his superior gives a mocking smile, calling the young man an arrogant kid who doesn't know his place. The scene cuts back to the present with Seo Gayong falling into the water as his boss's voice echoes, telling him not to do anything he'll regret. At that moment, a group of masked guys appears in the rain, revealing who was responsible for throwing him in there. Underwater, our protagonist thinks that he actually does have one regret in this life, and that regret is having to leave this crappy world without taking down all the lowlifes like his boss. Lying on the ground and bleeding, Seo Gayong wonders if this is how it all ends in such a useless and meaningless way. As his vision fades, all he can think is that if he just had a little more time, everything would be different. Suddenly, a bright light flashes in his mind, showing scenes of paramedics rushing to help him. When he regains consciousness, the first thing our protagonist sees is the white ceiling of a room and an IV bag. Looking at his own hand with an IV line, he wonders if this is really a hospital. From there, he sits up in bed, completely shocked, questioning how he survived a fall from that height. A satisfied grin appears on his face as he starts laughing, realizing he's been given a second chance. Now, he has the time he needed to hunt down his enemies, even if they framed him to be seen as a criminal. The fact that he's alive will be their worst nightmare. So he gets up, determined to get out of there. With no time to waste, he walks toward the bathroom, as he needs to escape that hospital as soon as possible. However, upon looking in the mirror, he touches his own face and feels something very strange, as if it's not him. At that, Seo Gayong panics upon seeing a completely different face in the reflection and lets out a scream. To make matters worse, he realizes his voice has also changed, leaving him even more confused. Desperate, he starts slapping himself, believing this can only be a very weird dream. The pain from the slaps knocks him to the floor, and he wonders how a dream can feel so real and painful. Seo Gayong then thinks that he needs to wake up soon, because his real body might be fading away somewhere. Seeing that slapping himself isn't working to wake him up, our protagonist decides there's only one way out of this dream. So, he runs toward the window to try a slightly more drastic measure. But just then, the bedroom door opens and a couple walks in, all happy, calling out the name Seo. Their happiness vanishes the moment they see the boy about to jump from the hospital building. Faced with the scene, the two are completely shocked and ask who he is, not understanding a thing. From there, the prosecutor realizes that something impossible and logic-defying has happened to him. To avoid any more confusion, he pretends to have lost his memory and takes on the identity of Kim Seo. In the doctor's office, the woman asks why her son tried to jump, and the doctor says it's a temporary symptom of shock. Seo Gayong reflects that in the beginning, it was very difficult to understand and accept the whole situation. He even threw a fit saying he wasn't Kim Seo, which led to them taking him to a psychic. When they got there, the woman looked at him and, with a strange smile, said there was a departed man inside him. The boy's mother panics at the revelation, and our protagonist is surprised by the shaman's accuracy. However, the psychic quickly gives herself away, saying it was a female spirit and that he needed an exorcism. After all the chaos of being reborn in someone else's body, he started getting used to the idea. And as 3 weeks went by, our protagonist finally adapted to his new life and his new body. While watching television, a specific news story caught his attention on the screen. The report confirmed that Prosecutor Seo Gayong was found without life, making our protagonist accept that he really was gone. From there, he understands that he has no choice but to live his new life as Kim Seo. Arriving in the kitchen, he sees the breakfast table already being set with a full meal. A moment later, he joins the table and says good morning to his new father, who greets him back. Unlike his past life as a lonely orphan, now our protagonist has a real family. His father's name is Kim Jun-man, and to be honest, he's the kind of person the prosecutor hated most in his past life. Kim Jun-man is the CEO of a major construction company, a corrupt man who bribes prosecutors without a shred of fear. Despite everything, he seems dedicated to his family, which makes our protagonist think that maybe he's not such a bad person after all. At that moment, his new mother, Oh Mi-jung, enters the room complaining about her husband's booze, stenched breath. She's a very elegant woman who's never washed a dish in her life and believes anything from France is automatically superior. Soon after, his younger brother, Kim Jin-young, joins them at the table, dreaming of becoming a great chef. Our protagonist still finds it very strange to have 3 new family members, but the weirdest part is being in this new body. Coincidentally, in this life he's also a prosecutor, but still a trainee, and he fell from the 5th floor of a building. He wonders if this was some kind of prank from the gods as he woke up in Kim Seo, Jin's body with no memory of the accident. Regardless of whether it's a divine joke, he's been given a second chance and won't let it end as uselessly as the last one. Looking at his reflection in the soup, our protagonist thinks that if he uses all the resources he has now, he can get what he wants. This way he can finally have his revenge against Chief Prosecutor Kim Jun, the man responsible for his ruin. A moment later, his father asks if he's going back to work the next day, and the young man just nods. Kim Jun-man questions if he doesn't need more rest, but our protagonist says he needs to work to make up for lost time. From there, the father suggests inviting his uncle for dinner before he leaves, which leaves both brothers pretty surprised. Faced with their reaction, Kim Jun-man ignores it and calls his younger son Jin-young for a chat. The father tells the boy to say goodbye to his older brother before he heads back to the city of Gangwon-do. In private, Jin-young says he made up other plans to avoid having dinner with their uncle and got an earful for it. He remembers his brother's amnesia, and says he'll see how unbearable their uncle is, as the guy acts like he's the king of the world. Jin-young continues to complain that their uncle looks down on them, but is always asking for money, which piques our protagonist's curiosity. Seo Jun-jaeung thinks he'll soon find out what this uncle is like, as the scene shifts to a very luxurious house. While he's reading in his room, someone informs him that his uncle has arrived for his visit. With that, our protagonist closes the book, thinking he's finally going to see the face of this much talked about relative. Walking down the stairs, he wonders if his uncle could be as bad as his old boss, and comes face to face with a waiting man. A shockwave hits him full force, leaving our protagonist completely paralyzed by the sight before him. The older man just nods, maintaining a cynical smile that he knew all too well. In the young man's eyes, the reflection of his greatest enemy appears, bringing back the worst memories of his life. The memory of Kim Jun threatening him with a mocking gaze comes rushing back, confirming his suspicions. With a fake smile on his face, the uncle asks if he's feeling well, acting like a concerned relative. Our MC is floored, because the scumbag who ruined his life was actually the uncle of the body he now possessed. During dinner, Kim Jun pretends he was worried when he heard the news of the accident at the apartment. He continues the charade, saying he's very happy to see his nephew recovering well. The father then comments that his son lost his memory, and the uncle seems to absorb this information with great interest. Kim Jun asks if he'll be able to handle work, while inside, our protagonist is boiling with rage. But for now, he holds back and, with a forced smile, replies that there won't be any problem. Seo Jun-jaeung says that only his personal information is gone, and the rest is intact for him to carry out his revenge. The uncle then offers to use his power to bring his nephew to Seoul, which gets the father all excited. The camera focuses on a steak being cut, showing all the tension and pent-up anger in the air at that dinner. With a piece of meat on his fork, Kim Jun asks what he thinks of the proposal, putting him on the spot. Seo Jun-jaeung says he's fine, but inside, he swears he won't become that man's prey again. With his hand on the knife, Kim Jun suddenly changes the subject, seeming to have a question. And so, he asks if his nephew really doesn't remember anything from the accident, and our protagonist denies it on the spot. At that, the uncle gives a satisfied smile, as the young man's amnesia seems to have come in handy. The scene shifts to the next day, with our protagonist finishing packing his things to go back to work. While carrying a box, he remembers the strange smile his uncle gave him during dinner. He questions whether it was just his imagination, or if there was a dark meaning behind that look. At that moment, a voice interrupts him, asking if he's finished packing for the trip. It was Kim Jun's son, who by a huge coincidence was also a prosecutor. With the box in his arms, our protagonist says he forgot something as he passes his family in the living room. But his cousin stops him and grabs a folder, asking if that's one of the cases he's studying. Faced with the situation, Kim Jun opens the file with a smug smile, making Seo Jun-jaeung very nervous. The cousin starts reading the case details and offers to explain everything, acting superior. Our protagonist refuses the help, but Kim Jun insists, saying the problem there is the lack of evidence. As his cousin shows off, the uncle watches from a distance and scoffs, finding it pathetic that his son is trying to teach him anything. Kim Young-jun takes a sip of wine and comments that with time, his nephew will get the hang of it. But our protagonist becomes thoughtful, as he believes it will be difficult to win the case by treating it as an assault. At this, Kim Yun-won stares at him mockingly and asks what he would know about such a complex case. Seo-jun Jae-young then retorts, saying it's hard to prove the victim was incapacitated just from drinking. And to make matters worse, the two had met several times and even exchanged romantic messages. The cousin gives a smug smile and confirms that's exactly the argument the defense will use. However, a confident smile appears on our protagonist's face, as he had a plan B in mind. He reveals that if it were him, he'd use Article 302 of the Penal Code to get the guy a different way. And so, he explains that the man deceived the girl, leading her on with the promise of a serious relationship. This fact alone already makes him punishable, and our protagonist questions why they should take the harder path. In the background, Kim Young-jun observes the scene with a surprised look, impressed by the turnaround. The father then intervenes, saying they're both right, as the law can be interpreted in various ways. At that, Kim Young-jun puts his glass on the table, saying they need to go as it's getting late. The father and mother exchange a relieved look, happy that everything ended well within the family. The next day on the road, the father calls Seo-jun Jae-young, laughing and saying he's never seen his uncle so flustered. Our protagonist smiles in the car as he ends the call with his father, who was praising him quite a bit. But looking at himself in the rearview mirror, he starts to feel a little bad for the true owner of that body. Soon after, he arrives at his destination, which is the Gangwon District Prosecutor's office. Walking into the building, Seo-jun Jae-young thinks that he was expecting a reception like this. The atmosphere of the place was even more depressing than he could have imagined, with everyone looking defeated. As it turns out, the place was known as the Dongnam Exile, where they send prosecutors who lose their battles. He then heads to room 285, which belongs to Prosecutor Lee Mung-soo. Upon entering the office, our protagonist remembers that this was where Kim Seo-jin was doing his internship. With a confident smile on his face, Seo-jun Jae-young thinks it's great to be back at his old job. Suddenly, a voice interrupts him, asking why he's standing in front of the door like a fool. Lee Mung-soo says that since he's back from his time off, he'd better be ready not to embarrass him in any way. With that, he throws a pile of documents on the desk with great force, making a loud noise. Our protagonist picks up the papers, preparing to hear the details of his first case in this place. The case was about a 40-year-old woman who was the victim of an accident while driving home. Lee Myung-soo questions if he just lay around for 3 weeks and asks him to give a summary of the case. Seo-jun Jae-young explains that the driver was indicted, but he claims it was an unavoidable accident. At that, Lee Mung-soo says they need to prove it wasn't unavoidable and asks for the expected sentence. Our protagonist replies that with a plea deal, it would be 1 year in prison with 2 years of probation. The older prosecutor gets furious and asks if he took private lessons from his uncle for 3 weeks. With this, Lee Mung-soo thinks that he doesn't like the rookie and can't find a flaw to criticize him for. So, he asks if the young man has been to the accident scene, and our protagonist denies it on the spot. Faced with this, his superior blows a gasket, screaming that a rookie needs to go to the crime scene. And with a finger pointed toward the street, he orders Seo-jun Jae-young to go to the location immediately, no excuses. Outside, our protagonist thinks that he was sent to the crime scene after only an hour of work. However, a smile appears on his face, as he was already eager for some real action. From there, he starts analyzing the case and remembers that the scene was a shoulder with a very sharp curve. Looking at the road, Seo-jun Jae-young wonders how the driver took that curve at 80 kilometers per hour. He then crouches down on the asphalt, thinking that the normal thing to do would be to slow down and find something on the ground. His eyes light up as he picks up a piece of debris, realizing that it could be an important clue. In his hands was a piece of the car's side view mirror, which will definitely help solve the case. Suddenly, he has a strange vision of a woman desperately asking for help. In the scene, a man says that it's not a request but a 200 million won deal. But the guy in the car isn't satisfied and raises the offer to 300 million won. The woman then accepts the deal, and the man celebrates the easy money he just made. At that, the vision disappears, and our protagonist is left there wondering what that was. He understands that since his reincarnation, touching certain objects makes him see their past. With the piece of the mirror in his hand, he wonders if the vision is related to the current case. The words favor and 300 million echo in his mind, leaving him quite intrigued. Faced with the situation, he begins to suspect that this was not a simple car accident. Crouched on the ground, He wonders if there are more memories but knows he can't force the vision. At that moment, a voice calls his name, Kim Seo Jin, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was his colleagues Shin Jong-sung and Lee So. He who asked what he's doing there all alone. With a nervous smile, our protagonist hides the piece of the mirror to avoid raising suspicion. He says he was just checking out the scene and thinks that he needs to be more careful around others. Shin Jong-sung then asks where he got hurt, as not even Yoon-won knows the details. Lee So. He replies that he got hurt a little here and there, without giving many details about the incident. At that, Shin Jong-sung complains that they were kicked out of the office, because everyone at that branch hates them. Our protagonist understands that for exiled prosecutors, a rich rookie like him must be a real pain in the neck. His colleague then says to get it over with, as he heard it was a simple traffic accident. Seo Jun-jaeng tells them both to wait at a nearby cafe, but Shin Jong-sung asks why they don't just leave. With a serious look, he replies that he has things to check and won't be leaving there anytime soon. Faced with his response, his colleague gets annoyed and places a hand firmly on our protagonist's shoulder. Shin Jong-sung asks what his problem is and why he's acting so strange all of a sudden. In the background, Lee So he watches the scene with a worried expression, unsure how to react to the situation. But our protagonist just lets out a mocking laugh, finding his colleague's attitude completely pathetic. He then removes the hand from his shoulder and says the case is his, and if he's not interested, he can leave first. Shin Jong-sung is shocked by the audacity and asks if he wants to ruin his debit to finally wake up. The colleague continues his lecture, saying that the lawyer on the other side is a friend of his father, and that he used to beg for help. Our protagonist finds it unbelievable that a prosecutor over 30 is threatening him with his daddy's friend. With a victorious smile, he tells his colleague to send a message when he gets home, showing he's not afraid. And with a sarcastic grin, our protagonist tells him to ask his daddy's friend to pick a fight with the big, bad Kim Seo Jin. Shin Jong-sung gets furious with the mockery and grabs his colleague's collar with all his strength. Seeing the commotion, Lee So, he approaches and, with a firm voice, tells them both to stop fighting. She informs them that she'll be waiting at a nearby cafe, and asks them to call when they're done with what they need to do. The annoyed colleague then lets go of our protagonist and, with a hateful glare, leaves, swearing revenge. In the car, Shin Jong-sung says he's going to call Yoon-won, the chief prosecutor's son, to sort out the situation. Lee So he wonders why he's trying so hard and calls the young man, asking what's gotten into Kim Seo Jin. She always thought he was just a guy who liked to show off, but now she wonders if she was wrong. However, the young woman quickly dismisses the idea, believing that his new attitude won't last very long. Back at the accident scene, our protagonist watches his colleagues leave, finally alone. He then wonders why the old Kim Seo Jin hung out with a guy like that and with Kim Yoon-won. From the information he gathered over the past few weeks, the previous owner of the body was a very calculating person. So, he decides to put that aside for now and finish investigating the accident scene. At that moment, an elderly woman approaches and warns him to be careful, as it's dangerous to stand there. Our protagonist introduces himself as an investigator, and the woman asks if there's still anything to investigate. The old woman expresses her sorrow for poor Soo Jae-young, and our protagonist asks if she knew the deceased well. The woman confirms, as she owns the supermarket and watched her grow up, saying she was a good person. With that, she reveals that the driver, Jang Dong-ik, had disappeared for years and only came back to cause this mess. At that, Seo Jun-jaeng connects the dots and realizes that Jang Dong-ik was the man from his vision. He then asks if the driver was close to the family, and the old woman remembers that the victim's sister was his classmate. Our protagonist becomes thoughtful with the new information, as the case is getting more and more suspicious. In the car, he calls an officer and asks him to investigate the financial situation of the victim's family. And to be more specific, he asks them to check the debts and call records of her sister. And so, he drives away, feeling that the pieces of the puzzle are finally falling into place. In a file, the victim's name is revealed as Woo Soo Jae-young, 41 years old and separated for 7 years. It turns out she worked day and night to raise her 2 children alone, without anyone's help. On the day of the incident, there was a staff dinner at the sashimi restaurant where the woman worked. After dinner, she was heading home alone when the supposed accident happened along the way. The scene shifts to the restaurant, where our protagonist asked the owner if the dinner was a last-minute thing. The owner, Kim Oh-sung, denies it and explains that the dinners are always announced a few days in advance. Our protagonist asks the restaurant owner about the money he gave the victim and wants to know the exact amount. Kim Oh-sung replies that he gave her 100,000 won, and our protagonist finds the amount very high since her house was very close by. The man explains that the woman was very frugal and preferred to walk to buy snacks for her children, so he gave her the money to help out. He remembers that on that day, as it was already late, he insisted that she take a taxi home to be completely safe. However, the owner reveals that he saw her getting out of the car just after turning the corner to continue the rest of the way on foot. At this, he laments that if she had taken the taxi, she would still be alive, and our protagonist jots down the key points of the case. With this information, he concludes that for someone who wanted to harm her, it would be very easy to predict her route and her schedule. Back in the car, he analyzes the file of the victim's sister, named Woo Soo-jin, 45 years old and, by the way, single. The woman had a small, failing restaurant and a 120 million won debt to dangerous loan sharks. Soon after, he moves on to the driver's file, Jong Dong-ik, who happened to have studied at the same school as the victim's sister. His record shows 2 convictions for violence and a 30 million won debt, plus he had recently returned to town. Although there's no proof of contact between the two, our protagonist finds it very likely that they met, and suddenly he notices something. He discovers the victim took out a life insurance policy for her children 1 year, and 3 months ago for the absurd amount of 1 billion won. And so, our protagonist focuses on the most important part of the document to find out who would receive all that insurance money. And to his surprise, the beneficiary was none other than the victim's sister, Woo Soo-jin, making her the prime suspect in the case. The scene shifts to the office where Lee Mung-soo receives a call from a superior who warns him about his new opponent. Lee Mung-soo responds very rudely, telling the man not to worry and to just hang up the phone. With that, he turns to our protagonist and asks if he's ready for the first investigation of the day. The superior warns him that the lawyer on the other side is a former senior prosecutor and tells him not to get intimidated, no matter what. Seo-jun Jaeyoung turns to leave the room but can't shake the feeling that there's something very strange in the air. However, just as he's about to leave, Lee Mung-soo calls him back to give one last important warning. With a threatening look and a pointed finger, the older man tells the rookie not to make any mistakes. Our protagonist just nods as his boss's words echo in his mind. After the young man leaves, Lee Mung-soo approaches the office window to observe something outside. He stares intently at a man and whispers the name Gu Sang-jin with a very serious expression. The scene shows Gu Sang-jin walking through the parking lot toward a car that was waiting for him there. From inside the vehicle, a voice greets him casually, asking if he finally made it. The man in the car smiles arrogantly and says he's not going to lose to someone like him. No way. Gu Sang-jin in turn stares at the man with an expression of contempt, not seeming very happy about the meeting. The two walk together, and the man from the car says the fresh air did him good, but Gu Sang-jin just wants to go back to Seoul. Gu Sang-jin asks about the prosecutor he'll be facing, and his colleague calms him down, saying it's just a rookie. The young man adds that the rookie is arrogant, because his father is the head of the Daejeong construction company. At this, Gu Sang-jin states that the kid needs to be crushed to finally learn to fear the law. The two say their goodbyes and agree to grab a bite together once the interrogation is over. Alone, Kim Yeon-hwan thinks with hatred that Seo-jun Jaeyoung insulted him and swears he'll take him down a peg in court. The scene then shifts to the door of interrogation room number 302, where everything is about to happen. Inside, our protagonist and the suspect await the arrival of the lawyer, who boasts about his high win rate. With a confident smile, the veteran lawyer introduces himself as Gu Sang-jin and hands over his business card. Seo-jun Jaeyoung takes the card while the older man thinks he's going to turn his debit trial into his downfall. The veteran lawyer mockingly asks our protagonist's age, and the young man says he shouldn't ask. Gu Sang-jin feigns an apology and says he was just curious before suggesting they get straight to the point. He begins to argue, citing examples of unavoidable accidents like a pedestrian appearing out of nowhere or a bicycle going the wrong way. The lawyer claims that this case is exactly the same and asks them not to be greedy, but our protagonist interrupts him. With a serious look, Seo-jun Jaeyoung says he'd first like to ask Mrs. Jang Dong-ik a question. The suspect gets nervous and asks his lawyer what he should do, and he tells him to let the young prosecutor ask. Seo-jun Jaeyoung ignores the lawyer and gets straight to the point, asking the suspect about his debts. He continues questioning where the man got the money to pay for such an expensive lawyer, and Gu Sang-jin becomes furious. With a smirk, our MC apologizes, saying he was just curious, throwing the lawyer's own words back at him. Gu Sang-jin bowls with rage inside, wondering how this arrogant brat dares to act like this in front of him. But our protagonist remains calm, thinking he'll see how long the lawyer can keep up that act. And so, he changes the subject and asks the suspect if he graduated from Dongnam Elementary School. Right after, the young man questions if he knows Woo Soo-jin, the victim's sister, and the man's reaction is pure shock. Faced with this, Gu Sang-jin quickly tells his client not to answer and Jang Dong-ik obeys immediately. Our protagonist reveals that the insurance beneficiary was the sister, and the lawyer explodes, asking what that has to do with anything. With a serious look, he replies that he has determined the possibility that this was not a simple traffic accident. Upon hearing this, Jang Dong-ik starts to sweat, and his desperate expression gives away all his nervousness. Gu Sang-jin gets annoyed and yells at him to stop talking about possibilities and bring some solid evidence to the table. However, a small, confident smile appears on our protagonist's face as he was prepared for this. He calmly says he has evidence and turns the laptop to show a video he obtained. Jang Dong-ik's reaction is pure terror upon seeing what was being displayed on the prosecutor's computer screen. Our protagonist shows a video of Jang Dong-ik sitting in a cafe near the victim's workplace on the day of the incident. Gu Sang-jin scoffs at the evidence, saying that tracking his client doesn't make him a suspect in any way. He boasts about his 15 years of experience and claims he can read the young prosecutor's thoughts. And so, the lawyer says our protagonist suspects a conspiracy between his client and the victim's sister. With a threatening look, he warns him not to disturb a grieving family if he doesn't want to see his name in the media. Faced with the situation, he suggests the young man get concrete evidence, or else they will only discuss the accident. But our protagonist interrupts him, saying he's getting it all wrong and underestimating the situation. The young man's confidence leaves the experienced lawyer completely shocked and even a little scared. With a firm gaze, Seo-jun, Jaeyoung states that he's the one who decides the charge and he doesn't need his permission. Gu Sang-jin is left speechless, wondering how a rookie can have so much audacity and self-confidence. He doesn't understand where all that veteran-like composure our protagonist displays comes from. Realizing the situation, the lawyer tells his client to keep quiet and not show any weakness to the prosecutor. Our protagonist then starts quoting the conversation from his vision, saying that 200 million is a very low amount. He completes the sentence by talking about 300 million and Jang Dong-ik is terrified, wondering how he knows that. With a victorious smile, our protagonist asks if what he just said doesn't sound very familiar to them. Desperate Jang Dong-ik stands up and starts yelling that he did nothing and is innocent of the charge. Our protagonist just stares at him calmly and with one finger presses a key on his laptop keyboard. He then asks who the suspect called right after the supposed accident happened on the road. Jang Dong-ik stammers trying to answer, and our protagonist pressures him, asking if he was of sound mind after the crash. And so, he reveals that the call was made at 1:40, but the fire department was only alerted 6 minutes later. With a confident smile on his face, our protagonist questions if the call to emergency services took 6 minutes to go through. Gu Sang-jin tries to argue that the camera's clock might be wrong, but the young man has another card up his sleeve. Our protagonist reveals that the records show another call made 6 minutes after the first one, to emergency services. And that call was at exactly 1:40 in the morning to Woo Soo-jin, the victim's older sister. From this, he concludes that the man called the mastermind while waiting for the woman to stop breathing on the ground. Outside the room, Lee Mong-soo is shocked to realize that this was actually a murder case. Without wasting a moment, he grabs his phone and looks for the chief prosecutor's contact to inform him of the situation. With a satisfied smile on his face, he calls his superior and says that he needs to get down there immediately. At that moment, a security camera in the corner of the room reveals that someone was listening to their entire conversation. The chief prosecutor arrives and asks in shock how the rookie managed to unravel such a complex case all by himself. Lee Mong-soo watches from a distance and admits that Kim Seo-jin is not bad at all and that Gu Sang-jin has met his match. With a satisfied smile, he turns and asks if he can write a little script to take advantage of the situation. The older man comments that their branch has been quiet for too long and that a little noise wouldn't hurt. At this, Lee Mong-soo asks if that's all with a very malicious look, as his plans are bigger. Soon after, he reveals with a smile that the lawyer Gu Sang-jin is actually a classmate of his. Because of this, he really wants to tarnish that arrogant guy's reputation, showing all his resentment. The scene shifts to Kim Yeon-won and Lee So, he walking as he asks if she knew about the investigation. The young woman replies that she didn't know, and our protagonist's cousin says he'll have a tough day against Gu Sang-jin. Kim Yeon-hwan continues to mock, saying that a rookie like him will probably be humiliated in court. At the same time, a group of reporters gossips that Gu Sang-jin is the type who'd defend the devil himself for a paycheck. Kim Yeon gets worried but soon hears an unbelievable rumor that Gu Sang-jin is losing the dispute. Another reporter confirms the gossip, saying the rookie is on fire and isn't losing a single argument. Faced with the situation, Kim Yeon Won is completely shocked and wonders what the heck they're talking about. Suddenly, the interrogation room door bursts open, and Jang Dong, a key, comes out screaming for them to let him go. As the suspect is dragged away, our protagonist stares at the lawyer and coldly asks if he's leaving already. With a victorious smile, our protagonist asks if he wants to continue or if he's had enough. Gu Sang Jin explodes with rage and yells that he's out because he thought it was just a simple traffic accident. Seeing the man leave, our protagonist just calmly says for them to leave as well. At this, the lawyer turns and threatens the young man, telling him to watch his manners as he's seen plenty like him. After the threat, Gu Sang Jin finally leaves while our protagonist just watches from a distance. A memory comes to his mind of when the lawyer questioned him for working so hard in his past life. Back then, the man said that the harder he worked, the more he'd be seen as an easy target for others. And to succeed, he would have to grovel and scream that he loved the congressman to get what he wanted. Back in the present, our protagonist thinks that the man's face is just as unpleasant now as it was before. With that, he enters the room again, swearing he'll get rid of Gu Sang Jin soon. Meanwhile in the hallway, Kim Yun Won was spying on all the commotion from a distance. Shocked by what he saw, he turns to Lee So Hyun says that Kim Seo Jin has completely changed. The young woman then asks if even he can see that our protagonist seems like a different person now. Kim Yun Won is left speechless and just curses under his breath, so angry at being humiliated like that. With everyone confused, the question hanging in the air is what the heck is going on in that place. Back in the office, our protagonist's phone starts ringing off the hook on the desk. He then answers the call, and on the other end of the line was his boss, Lee Mung-soo. With that, the older man congratulates him on the good work, and invites him to go out and get something to eat. And so, the scene shifts to a traditional restaurant that has been serving gukbap for 30 years. Inside, Lee Mung-soo pours a drink and asks why he wasn't informed about the twist in the case. Our protagonist apologizes, but the boss says to forget it, as he can already guess the reason for the omission. The superior then asks with a curious look how he managed to turn a simple accident into a murder. With a smile on his face, Seo Jun Jaeyoung jokes that he used his psychometry powers to figure it all out. But he quickly gets serious and explains that he saw some loose ends in the clues and decided to investigate further. Lee Mung-soo praises him and tells him to keep it up because you need to see the forest, not just the trees. As the waitress brings the food, he thinks that his boss seems more favorable to him after he humiliated Gu Sang Jin. To celebrate his first interrogation, the boss ordered a double portion, and he wonders if this is some new form of hazing. The superior then asks if he wants to take the case to trial, and our protagonist accepts the challenge on the spot. Lee Mung-soo warns him that Gu Sang Jin will fight with everything he has, but the young man says the lawyer has dropped the case. However, with a confident smile on his face, the boss guarantees that the lawyer will be back for revenge. Lee Mung-soo explains with a wicked smile that he's pouring a bucket of cold water on the lawyer's life. On the other end of the line, Gu Sang Jin freaks out and asks the reporter who the gossipmonger was that told him everything. The reporter scoffs, saying he can't reveal his source and that he heard he was crushed by a rookie. At this, the lawyer explodes with anger and tells the man on the other end of the line to listen very carefully. And so he threatens him, saying not to dare write a word about it, or he'll regret it. But his expression changes to pure panic as he stammers and asks if the article has already been posted online. The journalist apologizes and says he didn't post the part about the defeat, but rather that he took on the murder case. The news spread like wildfire, and the headline read that the famous lawyer had taken on the murder case. The lawyer despairs at the speed of the news and thinks that against a rookie, it would have been a piece of cake. At that, he wonders if the news spread because it was controversial or if someone set it all up on purpose. With the pressure from the media and the public on him now, the lawyer has no way to escape the case. With no other choice, he slams his fist on the table with all his might and curses in anger for falling into the trap. The scene then shifts to a luxurious office, where a voice says that he certainly made a lot of noise with this. It was Gu Sang Jin, who was apologizing while looking at the news of the case on his personal computer. But the mysterious man says there's nothing to apologize for, as he doesn't care if he defends some stray mutt. However, the man named Jang Taek Jun warns him that he won't forgive a defeat, no way. With that, he gives his orders and says to portray the older sister as a pitiful figure. He wants the deceased sister to seem like someone who deserved what happened, and the prosecutor to be seen as a demon. Jang Taek Jun explains that if they do this, the public's heart will waver, and the judges will feel the pressure. He reminds him that clients don't care about their morals, but whether they are competent or not. And so, the CEO tells him to win at any cost, because if he can't win a trivial fight like this, he warns that there will be no more place for the lawyer in that company, and Gu Sang Jin leaves feeling pressured. With a clenched fist, he accepts the mission, as he has no other choice but to obey orders. From there, the media battle begins, with several reporters surrounding the lawyer with their cameras. They bombard him with questions about the pressure of taking the case and the rumors about the insurance money. Gu Sang Jin begins his act and asks on what evidence they are accusing a grieving family. A reporter then questions if he's claiming she's innocent, and what the reason for that would be. The lawyer says it's all just an allegation from the prosecution, and that no fingerprints were found in the case. He continues the show and asks the reporters to remember the principle of presumption of innocence. Gu Sang Jin finishes by blaming the prosecution and the media for already treating her as guilty before the trial even begins. With a flawless performance, he bows and begs the reporters to have some moderation, but inside his gaze reveals all his determination, as he won't let this humiliation go unanswered. From there, the media goes crazy with the news of the famous lawyer taking on a case with no fingerprints. In the visiting room, the lawyer meets with Woo Soo Jin and, with a confident smile, promises to prove her innocence. However, he asks for half of the insurance money in return, leaving the woman completely shocked by the proposal. And so, he pressures her to tell the truth and asks why and how she did that to her own sister. The lawyer claims this is the only way to get her acquitted and leaves her with no other way out. Woo Soo Jin then confesses that she needed to pay off her debts because she felt like she was at rock bottom every day. She remembers when her sister handed her the life insurance policy and named her as the sole beneficiary. From that moment on, greed took over, and she went crazy for a moment with the idea of the money. She cries, saying she was going to take care of her nephews, and that the money was to give them a better life. Completely regretful, she breaks down in tears and asks for forgiveness from her deceased sister, Soo Gyeong. Gu Sang Jin just watches the scene with a cold expression as she continues to lament. The woman continues to cry desperately, covering her face with her hands, unable to calm down. With a scared look, she asks if she can really be considered innocent after all that. With a confident smile, Gu Sang Jin tells her not to worry, as he will handle everything. From there, the media explodes with news about the case, calling the prosecutor reckless, and the lawyer a hero. In his office, our protagonist sips coffee while thinking that the JTJ law firm is quick to spin public opinion. But he puts the mug down on the table, knowing that such shallow tricks won't be able to hide the truth for long. With a determined look, Seo Jun Jaeyoung swears he will destroy all their lies at the trial that day. Soon after, in the elevator, he receives a call from his younger brother, Jin Young, for a chat. The young man asks if he ran into Jung Woo on the way, and our protagonist is confused as he doesn't know anyone by that name. He then remembers that Lee Jung Woo was a high school friend of Kim Seo Jin who worked in the violent crimes unit. Seo Jun Jaeyoung confirms the memory, and his brother explains that he ran into him for the first time in a long while the day before. Jin Young says that his friend dragged him to the accident scene and then went to Gangwon due to meet him. And so, he warns him not to be surprised if his friend shows up suddenly and wishes him good luck at work. And as if it were a premonition, a man appears and calls him by the name of Kim Seo Jin with a friendly wave. Our protagonist is shocked by the sudden appearance and wonders if that's really the so-called Lee Jung-woo. The friend asks if he remembers him despite the amnesia, and Seo Jun Jaeyoung says he vaguely remembers his face. Suddenly, Lee Jung-woo grabs him by the arm with force, leaving him completely surprised by the action. Lee Jung-woo holds him tightly and swears he'll find whoever pushed him off the 5th floor of that building. Our protagonist questions how he knows he was pushed, and his friend replies that it's a detective's hunch. With this, Seo Jun Jaeyoung reflects that nothing showed up on the cameras, and there's no record of who called for help. He decides he'll investigate later and tells Lee Jung-woo to get in the car as he has a trial. And so, the two get into the vehicle to make their way to the courthouse, as the trial was about to start. In the car, his friend asks why he's so serious and not cracking any jokes like usual. Lee Jung-woo finds it strange that he's not listening to girl group music and asks if he really doesn't remember anything. To test him, his friend asks if he forgot about the 300,000 won he borrowed from him. He continues the test and asks about the motorcycle, but our protagonist says he remembers denying the request. Given the answers, Lee Jung-woo smiles, realizing his friend remembers everything perfectly. Our protagonist is relieved to see that, luckily, the real Kim Seo Jin had a good friend by his side. Soon after, his friend's cell phone starts ringing suddenly inside his jacket pocket. Lee Jung-woo answers the call and asks if there's any news on the Woo Soo Jin case. Upon hearing about the victim Woo Soo Kang's cell phone, our protagonist goes on high alert with the information. Suddenly, he has a strange vision and wonders why his psychometry is kicking in out of the blue. Seo Jun Jaeyoung floors it, making the car's tires screech as it rounds a corner on the road. At the courthouse, People are commenting on whether the prosecution is just putting on a show, as lawyer Gu Sang-jin said. The reporters gossip that it will be tough for a rookie in his first case to beat a veteran like that. One of them continues to mock, saying he must have cooked up the case to make himself look like some great detective. Meanwhile, our protagonist walks confidently toward his place in the middle of the courtroom. The reporter turns to look at him with contempt, but he barely notices that the young man was already right behind him. Carrying a box of evidence, he passes the man with a serious and completely determined look. The journalist is shocked by the young man's dignity, as it's hard to believe he was just a trainee. Faced with his imposing presence, they begin to think that maybe the lawyer will be the only one embarrassing himself there. Soo Jun Jaeong sits in his place and begins to organize the documents for the start of the trial. But looking around, he notices that his opponent Gu Sang-jin had not yet arrived. Soo Jun Jaeong reflects for a moment, thinking it's incredible to be sitting in that place once again. For him, this was his recovered life as a prosecutor, and he wasn't going to waste this new chance. With everyone in their places, the judges arrive and begin the trial of the Dongnaem district. And with a look full of hatred, he swears that unlike his past life, he will not be defeated and will take them all down. The judge asks the defendant to be seated, and then asks the prosecutor to formally present the indictment. With a confident smile, our protagonist thinks that now begins the second act of his life as a prosecutor. He begins the indictment by saying that Woo Soo-jin conspired with her colleague Jang Dong to take her sister's life. Gu Sang-jin thinks the young man is arrogant and whispers to his client not to tremble and to deny everything he says. To pressure her, he asks what will happen to her nephews if she goes to prison. The woman convinces herself that she did everything for her nephews and that it was what her sister wanted too. At this, the judge asks if Woo Soo-jin acknowledges the facts of the prosecution's indictment against her. With an expression of suffering in a trembling voice, the woman completely denies the accusation. She starts to cry and begs them to believe her, saying she misses her sister very much. The audience is moved and begins to doubt the prosecutor, thinking he exaggerated to become a hero. But our protagonist just smiles, curious to see the face beneath that mask. Seeing the scene, the judge asks the prosecutor to begin the interrogation of the defendant to clarify the facts. He then asks if she knew she was the beneficiary of a 1 billion won life insurance policy. The woman replies that her sister told her to take good care of the children if anything happened to her. Seo Jun Gaung questions her about her debts to loan sharks, and she says it's nothing unusual. Our protagonist thinks the woman has some nerve and asks why she used a cell phone in someone else's name. She says she didn't know and that Jang Dong gave her the phone as a gift so they could talk, and the young man questions her. Under pressure, the woman reveals with a tired expression that the two were dating at the time. Soo Jun Jaeong pressures her and asks if they conspired to take her sister's life for the insurance money. The woman freaks out and starts screaming no, and Gu Sang-jin stands up to accuse the prosecutor of speculation. The judge sustains the objection and asks the prosecutor to stick to the facts while the defendant continues her act. Our protagonist says he will continue the interrogation, and the woman yells that she already explained the reason for the phone. With that, Gu Sang-jin prepares to object once again to the young prosecutor's questions. But our protagonist interrupts him with a shout, saying he's not talking about her cell phone. With a cold look, he reveals that he's actually talking about her sister's cell phone, the deceased Woo Soo-kang. Upon hearing that, the woman's expression changes completely to pure terror, as she wasn't expecting this. He questions her if she knew her sister recorded a diary on her cell phone, and the audience is confused by the revelation. With the cell phone in his hand, he explains the victim was recording a diary at the time of the incident, and something else was recorded. Gu Sang-jin is shocked by the news and wonders what recording this is that he's never heard of. Our protagonist just gives a victorious smile, wondering what the lawyer will do now. The recording begins with Woo Soo-kang's voice saying that her boss gave her money for a taxi. She thinks about using the money she saved to buy Christmas presents for her children. As she walks, she wonders if the children's father will show up and that she'll have a word with him. The woman dreams of the moment they will all eat the cake they made together as a family. But suddenly, she notices something strange and stops walking with a surprised expression. Then, a car speeds toward her and hits her full on, sending her cell phone flying. Lying on the ground and injured, she sees a man slowly approaching to finish the job. On the audio, the man says he hit her, but the scumbag was still breathing on the ground. On the phone, he despairs, asking what he would do if someone saw them doing that. Back in the present, our protagonist is shocked by the vision he just had of the crime. He slams on the brakes and his friend Lee Jung-woo screams in fright, not understanding his reaction. The next morning, he wakes up with a headache and wonders if he drank too much the night before. Looking at the calendar, our protagonist thinks he managed to button the first button correctly. While drinking a glass of water, he reflects that this time, he just got very lucky with the case. But he puts the glass down on the table, determined to turn his luck into a real skill. In his room, he tears a page from the calendar and thinks that in 1 week, the new assignments will be announced. A voice then questions why he left the calendar he got from Xinjiang, son lying around. Suddenly, a strange vision hits his mind, leaving him completely shocked by what he was seeing. Holding the calendar, he's startled because that memory that appeared out of nowhere wasn't his. The scene cuts back to the car, where our protagonist calls his friend Lee Jung-woo for a serious talk. With a determined look, he asks his friend if they can bring this new evidence to the court. Back at the trial, our protagonist reveals that the victim was recording a diary and another voice was captured. Gu Sang-jin panics at the revelation and wonders how he didn't know about the existence of that recording. In desperation, he stands up and objects because he wasn't notified of the new evidence in advance. From the middle of the audience, Lee Jung-woo stands up with the cell phone in his hand, ready to submit it as evidence. Our protagonist just gives a slight smile, as his plan to corner the lawyer worked. With the victim's cell phone in hand, he requests the admission of the evidence, as it is crucial to discovering the truth. Faced with the new evidence, the defendant Woo Soo-jin panics and completely freaks out. She tries to lunge forward, screaming that she did nothing, and Gu Sang-jin tries to hold her back while the judge calls for an officer. The audience is shocked, as they expected a fierce battle, but not for the lawyer to be on the defensive. The judge announces a 10-minute recess to decide on the admission of the new evidence in the case. Gu Sang-jin is furious because his entire career as a lawyer is at risk because of a rookie. He slams his fist on the table with all his might but suddenly stops, and thinks he's not going to let things end like this. With a determined look, he swears that if he's going down, he's not going down alone. After the recess, the session resumes, and the judge calls the prosecutor and the defense attorney to the front. And so, he says they will now decide whether to admit the cell phone as new evidence in the case. Without wasting time, the recording from the cell phone begins to play so that everyone in the courtroom can hear. On the audio, Jang Dong-ik's voice confirms that the woman was still breathing and talks about the 300 million. Our protagonist then asks the lawyer how he responds to that evidence, since the voice is Jang Dong-ik's. The lawyer thinks that even if he refuses now, the evidence will be admitted later, so he needs to buy time. However, he decides to admit the evidence because he knows he needs to give up quickly to avoid further damage to his image. With that, the evidence is admitted, and the judge tells our protagonist to continue the interrogation of the defendant. He then asks the defendant what was recorded on the cell phone, and she just remains silent with her head down. The recording continues with his voice complaining that the woman wasn't passing away and asking what she would do with the money. The audio reveals that she wanted a luxury handbag, and the audience erupts in outrage at her greed. With the revelation, the victim's ex-husband stands up and explodes with anger, unable to believe it. In tears, he yells that she took someone's life for such a pathetic reason and asks how she dares call herself a person. And so, he tries to move forward but is held back by the officers as he screams for her to pay for what she did. But with a look of pure hatred, the woman blames the man for the tragedy that happened to her sister. She accuses him of abandoning the family and not giving any money to help raise the children. With a wicked smile, she reveals that because she didn't trust him, she put the insurance in her name to secure the money. Completely devastated, the man begs to be released as he is dragged out of the courtroom by the guards. At this, the judge asks if the defense attorney wants to cross-examine, but he refuses, seeming defeated. And so, the first hearing is adjourned, and the next is scheduled for 10 days from then at 2 in the afternoon. Outside, Gu Sang-jin glares at our protagonist with hatred and swears he will pay for this humiliation. With a victorious smile, Seo-jun, Jaeyoung says they won't be seeing each other again because the lawyer is done for. Soon after, he receives a call from his boss, Lee Mung-soo, and confirms that the trial is over. The superior asks if there were any mistakes, and our protagonist calmly replies that everything went perfectly. With a sigh of relief, he thinks that he managed to do well in his first major case in this new life. But as he leaves the courthouse, our protagonist is surrounded by reporters curious about how he cracked the crime. Caught off guard, our protagonist is at a loss for what to say to the reporters there. The scene then shifts to the next day with a newspaper being thrown forcefully onto a table. Oh Mi-jung is startled by the noise and asks her husband, Kim Jun-man, what's going on. With a smile on his face, the father points to the newspaper and asks her to read it aloud. The woman begins to read the headline about a murder case uncovered by a rookie prosecutor. She continues reading and is shocked to discover that the prosecutor in question was none other than Kim Seo-jin. At this, the mother asks if it's really their son, and the proud father confirms the news. The man boasts that he bought all the evening papers, and that he's gonna buy the morning ones too. The smile on the father's face shows all the pride he's feeling for his eldest son. Celebrating the achievement, he hugs his son and congratulates him on the good work while the mother applauds. The scene then shifts to our protagonist's apartment as the sun sets on the horizon. The next day, he turns off the alarm clock very early, preparing for another day of work. Suddenly, a memory comes to his mind of when he received a calendar as a gift from someone. In the memory Shinjong, Sung says his father brought a bunch of calendars from the bank for good luck. Kim Yoon-won then asks if his uncle is really going to get the young man transferred to Seoul as he wanted. In the memory, Kim Yoon-won says the favor wasn't free and that he had to make it seem like a difficult task. At this, Shinjong, Sung asks what he's going to do with the young man in Seoul, and if he's going to turn him into his lackey. Kim Yoon-won laughs and says it's obvious, as he needs to be tamed. And just thinking about his regret already makes him happy. And so the two make a toast to their new lackey, the poor and innocent Kim Seo Jin. The vision disappears, and back in the present, our protagonist holds the calendar with a new understanding of the situation. A small smile appears on his face as he finally understands his colleague's dirty plan against him. With the calendar in hand, he realizes their plan was to bring him to Seoul to humiliate him even more. The scene shifts to the Gangwon District Prosecutor's office, where our protagonist currently works. Inside, he knocks on the door of room 284, preparing to enter his boss's office. Upon opening the door, he hears his boss yelling on the phone, wondering if that makes any sense. Lee Myung-soo freaks out, saying it doesn't matter if the office is big because that place was an exile for prosecutors. He continues his rant and yells at the man on the other end of the line to come work there, if he likes the place so much. Angrily, he hangs up the call, and our protagonist greets him, saying he's arrived for the day's work. The superior turns to him with a less than friendly expression and calls him by the name of Prosecutor Kim. With a serious look, he asks if his father's younger brother is Chief Prosecutor Kim Young-jun, and the young man confirms. Lee Myung-soo says he'll look the other way and use some of his contacts to help the young man. He reveals that although it's not official, the next assignments for the rookies are almost all set. However, the boss says the problem is him, and if he doesn't do anything, he'll be stuck in Dongnam forever. The superior warns that staying there too long will stain his resume, and everyone will say he's been corrupted, and so, he advises him to use his father's influence to get out of that place as quickly as possible. Our protagonist just listens to everything in silence, seeming to ponder his boss's words. But to the superior's surprise, he reveals that he intends to stay there, and doesn't want to be transferred at all. Lee Myung-soo is shocked, and our protagonist says he doesn't want to use connections and wants to learn from him. With a smile, he says he knows the kind of man his boss was, and that's why he wants to learn from him up close. He explains it's better to stay there and get stronger than to become Kim Yoon-hwan's lapdog in Seoul. Faced with the response, the boss just tells him to do whatever he wants and turns to leave. An office colleague laughs at the scene and comments that the boss is just acting that way because he's embarrassed. With a smile on his face, our protagonist watches his superior walk away down the office hallway. As he walks, Lee Myung-soo wonders what the heck he could teach a kid like that. But he decides he can't let a guy like that rot there, and that at least he won't be betrayed by him. The scene shifts to a meeting room where a colleague comments that our protagonist's situation is pretty bad. Shin Jong-sung scoffs, saying he's been exiled, and suggests he use his uncle's connections to get out of there. The colleague continues the taunt and says that, because he's talented, he'll soon be transferred to a better place. But he boasts that if he had the chance, he could have solved the previous case all by himself. At that moment, Lee Myung-soo enters furiously and tells the young man to shut up, threatening to finish him right there. The boss then turns to the colleague and asks for his name to give him a proper scolding. And so, he throws a file on the table and puts him on the spot, asking how he would handle the case. Caught off guard, Shin Jong-sung starts desperately flipping through the papers to find an answer. The file reveals it to be a case of fraud and embezzlement, and he thinks he needs to be careful not to mess up. Turns out a CEO skipped town with billions, and the secretary was accused of being an accomplice, but she claims innocence. Without thinking much, the colleague suggests they drop the charges, and the boss questions him about the reason. The young man explains that the secretary didn't profit at all and barely received a minimum wage to support herself. At this, our protagonist intervenes and says there's a high chance she is an accomplice, and the boss wants to know why. He explains that it's hard to believe someone who worked for 10 years with so much money received so little, and so, He suspects she was getting kickbacks in a secret account and that they need to find its owner. The boss points to Shin Jong-sung and says he has a very different opinion from our protagonist. With that, he approaches the young man and says that's exactly why he shouldn't be in that place. But to everyone's surprise, Lee Mong-soo turns and says a guy like the other one is who should stay. And so, he ends the lesson and tells everyone to leave after killing some time there. Shin Jong-sung is furious with the humiliation and wonders why the heck he's being treated that way. At that moment Lee So, he approaches and asks her colleague if he felt the same thing she did. The young woman then reveals that she feels like she's falling further and further behind Prosecutor Kim Seo Jin. Because of this, she decides she needs to find a way to learn more so she never falls behind again. Shin Jong-sung agrees in his thoughts, as he knows the current Kim Seo Jin is many steps ahead of him. He wonders how the young man changed so much, as a call with his father comes to his mind. On the call, the father shows his pride and offers help. But our protagonist says he wants to achieve it on his own merit. He promises he'll call if things get really tough and says goodbye to his father to continue his work. With that, he ends the call with a very determined expression on his face. Looking out the window, our protagonist swears he will no longer live inside his uncle Kim Young-jun's cage. To prove it wasn't just luck, he decides he needs to keep showing his skills to everyone around him. He decides that to show his skills, the best option is to investigate Dongnam's cold cases. Our protagonist thinks that since they are cases no one has solved, it's no big deal if he fails the mission. With that, he picks up one of the file boxes and wonders what would happen if he managed to solve the case. From there, he opens the file, thinking that success would be a huge achievement, and chooses his first target. The case was about the kidnapping of Yu Ah-sung, a boy who was found without life in a manhole 2 weeks later. He begins to analyze all the details of the file, looking for any clue that might have been overlooked. Faced with the brutal details, our protagonist is shocked and thinks about how a monster like that is still on the loose. With a determined look, he swears he will find the person responsible and make them pay for everything they did. And so, he continues his investigation, turning the pages of the file with a new determination. Suddenly, a voice interrupts him, asking what he's doing there alone with the Yu Ah-sung case. It was Lee So, he who questions him about the case, and our protagonist wonders why she's there at the office. The young woman explains that since she was working late, she decided to do something to pass the time. With a smile, he says he doesn't like the idea of a beast like that being on the loose all this time. Lee So, he agrees with him, as she also thinks the culprit of that crime needs to be caught soon. She then regrets not approaching him sooner and says that since he went to headquarters, they'll see each other from time to time. Our protagonist says he's gonna find the detective on the Yu Ah-sung case, and Lee So, he is surprised that he's going now. A bit shyly, the young woman offers to go with him, and our protagonist thinks for a moment. Holding the file box, he agrees to the idea, and the two prepare to leave together. The scene shifts to the office of Chief Prosecutor Kim Young-jun, who happened to be our protagonist's uncle. Kim Young-won questions why he didn't bring him to Seoul and assumes it was retaliation from the JTJ firm. With a mocking smile, the father says the young man was getting arrogant even before becoming a prosecutor. At this, the son realizes that this was revenge for him defeating the lawyer, Gu Sang-jin. The older man reveals he didn't stop it to create a debt, and that soon his uncle will request the transfer. With that, he puts out his cigarette and says that when the young man comes to Seoul, he'll put him under his son's supervision. Kim Young-jun tells him to train him well so that he can't do anything without his help, and the son agrees. And as if it were a prediction, the older man's cell phone starts ringing, exactly as he imagined. On the other end of the line, our protagonist's father reminds him of the promise to help transfer his son to Seoul. But to the man's surprise, the young man's father says it's no longer necessary because he wants to stay in Dongnam. The father continues, saying that a little hardship is good for him, and thanks him for the help, leaving the uncle furious. With the plan ruined, Kim Young-won panics because he wanted to do his internship in Seoul and now he might be sent away. Furious with the situation, Kim Young-jun looks at his son and calls him a complete and pathetic punk. Kim Young-won is shocked and asks if he did something wrong, but his father just confirms and tells him to get out. With a wicked smile, the older man wonders how his nephew dares to reject his will and stay in Dongnam. His eyes fill with hatred, as he won't accept being challenged by a rookie like that. No way. And so, he swears he will bury Kim Seo Jin forever. As the scene shifts to a sunny day. On the street, people are impressed by someone's beauty and wonder if it's some famous celebrity. It turns out the two were our protagonist and Lee So-hee, and she comments that he draws a lot of attention wherever he goes. The young woman asks what's wrong and if he's already used to all that attention from people. He denies it on the spot and suddenly spots his friend Lee Jung, Wu talking to two people up ahead. The friend reassures a man, saying it might not be just a disappearance and not to worry so much. Lee Jung-woo comforts a crying boy, and our protagonist realizes it's a missing person case. At that moment, his friend turns and calls his name with a smile, waving for him to come closer. Caught off guard, our protagonist is a bit shocked by his friend's sudden appearance there. Lee Jung-woo asks why he came with a celebrity, and our protagonist says she's a work colleague. With a smile Lee Seo, he introduces herself as a prosecutor from the Dongnam office, leaving the young man shocked. With a charming smile Lee Jung-woo introduces himself to the young woman and proudly shows his badge. He boasts about being from the Violent Crimes Unit, and our protagonist just turns to leave. But as he was walking, he spots a metal ring on the ground right in the middle of his path. And so, he bends down to pick up the object, and upon touching it, his psychometry ability is activated. The ring had a unique design with a golden star in the center and seemed to be very old and worn. Suddenly, he has a vision of a man with his hands tied, wearing that same ring on his finger. In the scene, a tied-up boy is being watched by a hooded figure in a dark, damp place. The man approaches and, with a gloved hand, grabs the boy's face with great force and violence. The assault continues with the man squeezing the boy's face, who is already badly injured and scared. And so, the hooded figure raises a tool and prepares to commit a terrible act against the boy. The vision ends with a terrible scene, showing the tragic and the poor boy met in that place. Back in the present, our protagonist is shocked as he realizes that was a memory from the Yu Ah-sung case. However, he's confused because that ring wasn't on the list of evidence for the case, and he doesn't understand why. At that moment, Lee Jung-woo approaches and says the ring seems to belong to Detective Jeong Min-ju, who must have dropped it. At this, our protagonist is surprised, and his friend confirms that he was the detective on the Yu Ah-sung case. Holding the ring, our protagonist can't believe what he just saw and what it means. At the police station, he finally meets Detective Jeong Min-ju, and the two formally introduce themselves. Soon after Lee Seo, he also introduces herself as a prosecutor from the Dongnam branch office. With that, Jeong Min-ju invites them to see the evidence, but our protagonist stops him for a moment. He then shows the ring he found and says he heard it belonged to Detective Jeong Min-ju. The man is shocked and wonders how the ring ended up there, and our protagonist assumes it's a gift from his son. Faced with the situation, the detective nervously agrees and thanks him for finding the lost ring. But our protagonist realizes he's lying and wonders why he has the evidence from the case with him. From there, the scene shifts to the evidence storage room at the police station to analyze the case. On the table are the pieces of evidence from the crime: a rope and a bloody hammer. The detective explains that most of the injuries on the victim's body were caused by the hammer. Our protagonist reveals that one of the victim's eyes was removed, and the weapon for that was never found. Jeong Min-ju says no other evidence was found and calls the culprit a meticulous scumbag. Seo Jun-jaeung asks if that's everything, and the detective confirms, except for a cigarette butt for reanalysis. It turns out that at the time, there was no DNA match, even after testing 120 men. Our protagonist touches the hammer but has no reaction and discovers that the police concluded the culprit was a tourist. He then turns to the detective and asks if he also believes the culprit of the crime was indeed a tourist. With a nervous smile, Jeong Min-ju just vaguely agrees, without giving a very concrete answer to the question. And so, our protagonist thanks him for his time, and the detective tells him to contact him if he needs anything else. Soon after, the two leave the police station and walk together through the parking lot to continue the investigation. Outside, Lee Jung-woo asks the detective if he's a friend of our protagonist, and the older man confirms on the spot. The friend then asks what kind of person he is, and the detective says he's the type who achieves his goals at any cost. Given the answer, the detective gets a very thoughtful expression while taking a sip of his hot drink. As he walks away, our protagonist thinks that no matter what they say, he will uncover the whole truth about the case. At that, he stops walking for a moment, seeming to have reached his next investigation destination. Before them was the place where Yu Ah-sung's body was found 10 years ago. Lee Seo, he confirms and asks if he thinks there are still clues left after 10 years since the incident. With a confident smile, he says you never know, and that's why they can't miss any detail of the location. The location was an alley with little foot traffic, and the security camera was only installed after the crime was discovered. He concludes that the culprit knew the area well, because the manhole where the body was dumped was always covered with trash. Lee Seo, he agrees with the theory and jots everything down in her notebook, as it makes a lot of sense to her too. Our protagonist reflects that the cigarette butt was what removed the residents from the suspect list. He understands that the course of the investigation was manipulated, all because of Detective Jeong Min-ju. With that, he states that there's a high chance the culprit is a resident of that same area. Lee So he is confused by the statement and asks why he's so sure of his theory. The young woman remembers that the DNA from the butt didn't match anyone from the neighborhood, which suggests an outsider. With a confident smile, our protagonist questions if she's sure the butt really belonged to the culprit. Lee So he explains that the butt was found along with the victim's belongings, right on top of the body. At this, he suggests that the culprit might have planted the evidence there on purpose, and she is shocked. Our protagonist has a sudden insight and realizes there might be other victims of that same criminal. In the office, he analyzes a document about animal disposal and says it was exactly as he expected. He discovers that before the Yu Ah-sung case, there were several reports of mutilated animal disposals. And to his surprise, the number of reports dropped drastically right after the boy's case occurred. Faced with the new discovery, our protagonist thinks this can only mean two different things. With a serious and determined look, he prepares to finally unravel the mystery of that case. Seo Jun Jaeong has a vision of Detective Jeong Minju and wonders if that's his psychometry manifesting. In the scene, the detective receives a call asking him to help a boy named Yu Ah-sung get home. The person on the other end of the line explains that the neighborhood is dangerous and that they will be late due to a work emergency. Because of this, he asked Jeong Minju to take the boy home after school to ensure he's safe. The detective agrees to the favor, saying he can do that since he's the son of a close friend. The vision continues with Jeong Minju introducing himself on the phone to the person on the other end of the line. He then asks if the person he's speaking to has a moment to talk with him right now. Our protagonist remembers that the vision he had was exactly when he first met the detective. He explains to Lee So that Jeong Minju knew the area well and was also close to the victim, Yu Ah-sung. Furthermore, he could tamper with the crime scene and had the victim's ring, making him the prime suspect. However, Lee So he questions why he would still have the ring, as that would be the same as confessing to the crime. Our protagonist agrees and, to be sure, says he needs to trace the detective's steps on the day of the crime. Suddenly, a cat appears, and he finds it strange, as he hasn't seen any stray animals since arriving in that neighborhood. Lee So he crouches down to pet the cat and comments that a neighborhood with so many alleys should have several of them around. While she pets the animal, our protagonist watches her in silence, seeming to ponder something very important. At this, Lee So he questions why he's so far away and if he doesn't like cats. Our protagonist replies that it's nothing like that and that for some reason, cats have always hated him. The young woman finds it strange because this one was super friendly and even jumped into her arms despite never having seen him before. But suddenly the animal leaps from her arms and flies toward our protagonist with a loud meow. The cat then lands right on the young man's face, leaving him completely surprised by the animal's action. With the animal clinging to him, our protagonist can't do anything and just stands there without reacting. Upon touching the cat, his psychometry ability is activated once again, and he has a new, strange vision. In the scene, he sees a pole covered in posters and hears the sound of something hitting the ground hard beside it. Soon after, a hooded man appears, crouched in a dark, damp alley in the dead of night. In front of the man was a hammer and an animal's paws, showing what he was doing there alone. His clothes were all dirty and stained, revealing the brutal nature of his actions in that place. And so, the hooded figure picks up a glass with an eye inside, showing a bizarre trophy from his crime. The vision ends, and the cat stares at him, seeming to wonder if he was really the Kim Seo Jinit knew. Lee So he approaches worriedly and asks if he's okay, and our protagonist says yes, a little dazed. He then realizes that the weapon used in the vision was the same as in the Yu Ah-sung case and that an eye was also removed. With this, our protagonist understands that what he saw was actually the culprit of the Yu Ah-sung case. He realizes that the criminal was already attacking animals before the boy's case, as a kind of rehearsal for what was to come. Petting the cat, he thinks that crimes like this never end with a single victim and that there must be other cases. Because of this, he sends a message to an officer asking to check on the families that moved out of the area in the last 10 years. Our protagonist believes that either the culprit left the area or started attacking humans, but there are no records of serial murders. And so, he assumes the criminal stayed in the area but hid the new victims' bodies much better than Yu Ah-sung's. At this, he concludes that the clue to finding the culprit must be in the unsolved missing persons cases. He worries because if this is true, it means the criminal is still claiming victims and needs to be caught as soon as possible. A clock shows it's past 8 in the evening, and our protagonist remains focused on his investigation at the office. At that moment, the room's door suddenly opens, and someone enters the office to speak with him. It was Shin Jong-sung, who arrives scoffing and asking if he thinks he can solve a cold case that easily. He grabs the reports of missing teenagers and says they are just spoiled kids who ran away from home out of a tantrum. Our protagonist just stares at him in silence, not paying much attention to his colleagues' provocations and mockery. Shin Jong-sung continues the taunt, saying he's doing this for fame and that he's warning him as a concerned brother. With that, he reveals he's going to Seoul in a few days and asks if our protagonist is upset that he's going alone. The colleague continues the provocation and offers to help if our protagonist needs anything, for old times' sake. But Seo-jun Jaeong cuts him off and, with a cold look, tells him to get his sorry self out of there. Shin Jong-sung is furious at the audacity, but our protagonist raises his hand and tells him to wait. Soon after, he answers his cell phone, completely ignoring his colleague, who freaks out in anger in the background. From there, the scene shifts, and our protagonist goes to a bar to meet with an important person. Inside, he sits down with Detective Jong Min-ju, who asks why he called him for this conversation. With a serious expression, the older man says that he's actually the one who has something to ask. He questions him about the 10-year-old case, and our protagonist replies that he just wanted to see the culprit's face. Jong Min-ju agrees with a smile and says that seeing the criminal's face is the reason they do this job. But the detective suddenly gets serious and decides he needs to tell our protagonist the whole truth. With his face sweating, he reveals that he's been investigating that case alone for 10 long years. He says the victim was the son of a friend, and that the boy admired him greatly as a great police officer. In a memory, he shows his handcuffs to the boy and says that even on the day of his disappearance, he was with the boy. Because of this, he grips his glass tightly and says he really wanted to catch the culprit with his own hands. Faced with the revelation, he downs his entire beer at once while our protagonist just watches the scene. Jong Min-ju slams the glass on the table and says he feels the limits of his abilities, as he's been chasing the case for 10 years without any leads. However, he heard that our protagonist has a tenacious personality and knows of his performance in the last case. Because of this, he's asking for a favor, and our protagonist is surprised by the detective's request. Back in his apartment, the young man sits on the sofa to analyze an envelope he received from the older man. With a serious and focused look, he opens the envelope to finally find out what was inside. The detective then explains that he wants to pass the baton of the investigation to him, and that's why he's giving him the envelope. Our protagonist stares at the papers with a very serious and concentrated expression on what he's seeing. It turns out that inside the envelope was a list of the main suspects in the Sung case that he had investigated. Seo-jun Jaeong notices that some suspects match those he had in mind and wonders if this is a trick. The detective then reveals that after his visit to the police station, he received a threatening letter from the culprit. The letter was left on his doorstep with a photo of his youngest son, and he fears for his family's safety. At this, Jong Min-ju says he's dropping the case and begs our protagonist to catch the scumbag. Back home, the young man grabs a drink and remembers that on the day of the crime, the detective went to pick up the boy, but had to return to the station. And it was from that moment on that all traces of poor Song completely disappeared. Soon after, his cell phone rings, and when he answers, a voice on the other end of the line desperately yells for him. The person on the other end of the line reveals that they found a match for the DNA from the cigarette butt. The next day at the Dongnam office, our protagonist receives the news that the man served time for robbery. Reading the suspect's file, he understands why there was no data on him 10 years ago. However, the man named Hyo-jong Jae has a perfect alibi, as he was hospitalized with a fracture at the time of the crime. To make matters worse, the suspect never left Jeju Island until 5 years ago and has never been to Chosin Rai. With this, our protagonist confirms his suspicions that the cigarette butt was a false clue left by the culprit. And so, he wonders how the cigarette butt of a man who was in Jeju ended up at the crime scene in Chosun Rai. Holding the evidence bag, he has a sudden insight and his psychometry ability is activated once again. With the butt in his hand, he has a vision of the past and can see all the details of what happened. In the scene, a group of students is in Jeju on a school trip, and a plane flies over the location. One of the students is sitting on a bench while his classmates chat and have fun nearby. The young man then gets up and starts following his friends to continue the tour of the island. On the ground, a still-lit cigarette butt shows that the man who was there was a smoker. Suddenly, a gloved hand approaches and carefully picks up the cigarette butt from the ground. With a wicked smile, the man places the butt in a plastic bag to use it as a false clue in the future. Back in the present, our protagonist holds the evidence bag and connects the dots, as the vision was from the year of the crime. He becomes thoughtful as the student's uniform in the vision looks familiar, and he feels like he's seen it somewhere before. Suddenly, a memory from the past comes to his mind, and he remembers seeing that same uniform in the neighborhood. With that, a small smile appears on his face as he finally found the clue he needed to solve the case. From there, He heads to the neighborhood school, feeling that he's very close to unraveling the entire mystery behind the crime. Arriving there, he finds a group of students gathered around a cat that everyone thought was very cute. One of the students tries to give a snack to the cat Hanyang, but a friend tells him to give up, as she always runs from him. At that moment, a man approaches and comments that there are almost no cats in the neighborhood, but he sees one right in front of him. One of the students explains that the cat was raised at the school, and the teacher asks our protagonist what he's doing there. The young man replies that he was just passing through, when one of the students turns to look at him with a very surprised expression. The teacher then tells everyone to go home, and a student jokes that he just wants to keep the cat Honyang for himself. At this, the man suggests they study at night, and everyone says their goodbyes on the spot to avoid staying any longer. The boy who was startled earlier leaves with his friends, but can't help looking back with curiosity. Seeing that he was caught red-handed, the student quickly turns and runs to catch up with his friends who were already ahead. Our protagonist then turns to the teacher and, with a serious look, reminds him that they've already met at the police station. The teacher recognizes him and asks for his name, leaving our protagonist astonished that he knew who he was. And so, the man explains that he's the most famous person in the neighborhood because of the case he solved. At that moment, the cat Honyang rubs against the teacher's legs, seeming very happy and comfortable with him. The man crouches down to pet the cat and reveals that he's heard a lot about him from Detective Lee Jung-woo. With that, he explains that his friend bragged so much about him that he became very eager to meet him in person. But suddenly, the cat attacks the teacher's hand when he mentions the investigation of the cold case. The animal then runs off, and our protagonist comments that for some reason, cats don't seem to like him very much. With a smile, the teacher invites him for tea in the reception room, since fate brought them together there. In the room, the man asks if the cold case he's investigating is the Yua Song case. Seo Jun Gyeong asks if it was Jung Woo who told him, but the teacher says the Yua Song case is the most famous in town. Our protagonist finds the word "callways" strange and remembers that the teacher was only assigned to that school 2 years ago. At that, the man reveals that his hometown is Chosin Rai, and that's why the case weighs on his mind, and he asks if there's any progress. Seo Jun Jaeyoung takes a sip of his drink and reveals that they already have a suspect, as someone was supposed to meet the victim on the day of the crime. The teacher comments that he looks younger than Jung Woo and wonders how they became friends, and the young man says they are the same age. With that, the man is happy to find someone his age and says he hopes they get along well, and our protagonist agrees. Our protagonist takes the opportunity and asks if that school is where the teacher studied, and he confirms on the spot. From there, he walks to the bookshelf and says that if they are the same age, the teacher must be in the school yearbooks. With a sly smile, our protagonist grabs one of the yearbooks, thinking he'll take a peek into the man's past. And so, he begins to flip through the pages of the book, looking for something specific among the photos of the students in that class. And as he turns the pages, one particular photo catches his eye, making him stop to analyze it more closely. In the photo, a group of uniformed students posed during a school trip to the famous Jeju Island that year. A victorious smile appears on his face, and our protagonist thinks he finally caught the scumbag. From there, he confirms that the culprit was actually a student at Dongnam School at the time the crime occurred, and to confuse the entire investigation, he went all the way to Jeju Island just to collect cigarette butts to use as false clues. Our protagonist reflects that he was a criminal genius and thinks about how many victims he might have had in the last 10 years. But he swears things won't happen the way the criminal wants anymore, because now he's in charge of the case. At that moment, a student approaches and calls him by a nickname, asking if he's really a real prosecutor. Seo Jun Jaeyoung recognizes the boy who was staring at him before, and the young man seems to be very worried about something. The student then bows and desperately begs our protagonist to help him find his missing friend. The young man explains that his friend Ha Shin disappeared a month ago, but the police think he just ran away from home and aren't looking for him. Our protagonist hands a handkerchief to the boy and asks where he last saw his friend. The student replies that it was at school on the day he disappeared. With that, the young man reveals that 3 days later, Professor Jae Hwan saw him in the city center. He says the professor tried to stop him, but his friend disappeared too quickly. Seo Jun Jaeyoung becomes thoughtful, as the last time the boy was seen was by the professor, and from a distance, someone was watching their entire conversation with great attention from the school window. It turns out it was the professor, who was spying on them with a very cold and calculating look. The scene shifts, and our protagonist gets into his car in the school parking lot. Soon after, his cell phone rings, and on the other end of the line was one of the investigators, Seojun Jaeyoung asks about the houses that moved from the area where the incident occurred. The officer explains that there have been no suspicious moves in the last 10 years. But there is one place that bothers him, and so, he asks our protagonist if he happens to know about the haunted house in the neighborhood. The investigator seems nervous and says he's not kidding and that the story is very serious. On the other end of the line, our protagonist listens carefully to the explanation and connects all the dots. With a smile on his face, he ends the call, as he now has everything he needs to act. From there, several police officers mobilize at the station to begin a new operation. The investigator's cell phone vibrates on the table, showing that the hunt for the culprit has finally begun. Lee Jung-woo wonders what's gotten into Seo Jin to contact him first after so long without talking. In the message, our protagonist invites him for a drink and says he has a great topic for their conversation. The friend is confused by the term, topic, wondering what the young man means by that. And so, the scene shifts to the next day in front of the Dongnam police station. Our protagonist arrives at the location and soon hears his friend Lee Jung-woo calling his name. The young man waves and calls him to sit with him, and the professor who was also there. Seojun Jaeyoung approaches, and the professor explains that he had some questions about the missing person case. Lee Jung-woo is curious to know how the two know each other, and our protagonist says they had tea together. At this, the friend invites them both for a drink, and the professor accepts the invitation on the spot. With that, the three leave the police station to go to a bar to talk more comfortably. But as they leave, they run into Detective Jong Minju, who greets them very casually. The older man explains that he had some urgent matters to attend to, and that's why he stopped by. But as he speaks, the victim's ring falls from his pocket to the ground right in front of everyone. Seojun Jaeyoung picks up the ring and hands it to the detective, commenting that he drops it frequently. From there, he confronts him and asks why he has possession of the ring, which is evidence in the case. Seojun Jaeyoung reveals that the grandmother from the convenience store across from the school has an incredible memory. He confronts him and asks if that isn't the ring he bought for Yua Sung on the day of the incident. Lee Jung-woo gets furious and asks what the heck he's doing, but our protagonist ignores him. With that, he continues the accusation and says that at the time of the incident, the victim was wearing the ring the detective bought. It turns out the grandmother at the store remembered everything, and that not long after, the boy disappeared and was found without life. Seojun Jaeyoung questions why the ring that should be in the evidence locker is in his pocket. Faced with the accusation, the detective panics and stammers, saying he can explain everything that happened. But our protagonist doesn't listen, and just stares at him with a serious and completely determined look. With a cold and hateful look, he says he'll hear his explanation in court, not there. Lee Jung-woo is devastated by the revelation and turns away so he doesn't have to face his coworker. And so, he approaches and handcuffs Detective Jeong Minju, arresting him for his crime. The friend then questions if that was the so-called topic for their conversation and says he could have given him a heads up. Our protagonist watches the two leave while the professor is shocked by the whole situation. The older man can't believe Detective Jong would do something like that and wonders what happened, but a small, discreet smile appears on his face, revealing something very dark behind his facade. Our protagonist then turns to Professor Jae Hwan with a very serious and determined look. The scene shifts to a dark room, where the only light comes from the slightly open window. On the floor, a man is tied up and gagged with several injuries all over his body. Suddenly, the room's door begins to be unlocked from the outside with a loud noise. The man on the floor is startled by the sound, and his eyes widen in pure panic at the situation. The doorknob then begins to turn slowly, and the door opens with a terrifying creak. On the other side of the door was none other than Professor Jae Hwan, who was watching him with a cold look. A wicked smile appears on his face as he prepares to commit another of his crimes. He laughs hysterically and celebrates that Jeong Minyu was taken away and reveals that he was the one who sent the ring to the detective. With a victorious smile, he says that's what the detective gets for meddling in a closed case. He continues to celebrate because everything went right in his way, and he's free to continue his crimes. With that, he turns to his collection of eyes and jars, showing just how sick he really is. The professor is excited because he can finally see his collection again after it being hidden for so long. He picks up one of the jars and says he thought he was going to pass away from missing it since the reinvestigation began. Suddenly, he stops talking and a strange glint appears in his eyes, as if he remembered something. The professor then turns to his victim and asks if poor Ha Shin is still alive under the sheet. With a glove on his hand, he says the boy must have been bored all alone and that now everything will be fine. With a wicked smile, he pulls back the sheet and says the professor is going to have a lot of fun with him from now on. And so he prepares for the worst, as his sick expression reveals just how anxious he was for that moment. But suddenly, his eyes widen in pure shock as something completely unexpected happens right in front of him. Out of nowhere, a punch lands squarely on his face, breaking his glasses and sending him flying sideways from the impact. Because of the force of the blow, he hits the ground hard without even having time to understand what was happening. Lying on the floor, he sees that the one who attacked him was Lee Jung-woo, and the professor is shocked, wondering what he's doing there. The criminal looks up and sees the legs of another person slowly approaching him across the room's floor. With his face bruised and scared, he can't believe he was caught like that so suddenly. From there, our protagonist emerges with the police and a warrant, saying the game of hide and seek is finally over. With a victorious smile, Seo Jae-young tells him to enjoy his last moments because he won't have his freedom anymore. And so Lee Jung-woo informs him that he is under arrest for kidnapping and for the cold case of Yu Ah-song. But the professor refuses to be caught and grabs the hammer on the floor, yelling that he won't let himself be captured. At this, Lee Jung-woo reacts quickly and blocks the criminal's attack with his own arm to protect himself. A police officer desperately yells to our protagonist, warning that the suspect is escaping through the window. But the professor scoffs, saying the game of hide and seek isn't over and that Kim Seo Jin will never catch him. Outside, Detective Jeong Minju watches the scene with a discreet smile on his face. And with a swift move, the older man grabs the criminal and throws him to the ground with all his might. The professor is completely shocked by the trip and falls face first on the ground with no chance to react. With the criminal on the ground, Jeong Minju stands up while everyone watches the scene, relieved that the chaos is over. The detective then kneels beside the professor to finally put an end to that long hunt. With that, he handcuffs the criminal and says the man has the right to remain silent from now on. Outside, the police surround the house and take the professor to the squad car to finally be arrested for his crimes. And so, they put the criminal in the car to take him to the station and begin the interrogation. Our protagonist approaches and says they have a lot to talk about and that they'll see each other again soon. With his face bruised and sweating, the professor is terrified by the threat and by what awaits him in the future. As the car drives away, Lee Jung-woo approaches and says he still can't believe what happened. The friend confesses he never imagined the professor would be the culprit, and that he thought our protagonist was wrong. But he says that when he saw all those disgusting things with his own eyes, he finally understood everything. Lee Jung-woo gets annoyed and complains if he was going to set up a plan like that with the detective, he should have told him sooner. With a smile, our protagonist says that to deceive the enemy, you have to deceive your allies first. And because of his anger, the professor fell right into the trap. The friend gets all embarrassed and says he always has an answer for everything, while our protagonist calls him simple-minded. Lee Jung-woo then lights a cigarette and asks how he tracked the location, and what the reason was for suspecting the professor. Seo Jae-young thinks for a moment and prepares to reveal all the details of his investigation to his friend. And so, he explains that the decisive reason that made him suspect the professor was what happened with the cat at the school. A memory of the vision he had comes to his mind with all the details of what happened that day. In the vision, the way the professor touched the cat was identical to the way the culprit grabbed the victim. He reveals that the man's actions perfectly matched those of the culprit he saw in his psychometry. Furthermore, he discovered that the professor was from the town and went to Jeju Island on the school trip well before the crime. Putting all the pieces together, our protagonist concluded that every single clue pointed directly to the professor. He also discovered that around the time the professor returned, a remote, haunted house was secretly sold. An investigator told him that the village chief let a good-looking young man move in there in exchange for a small donation. And to make matters worse, the village chief said the screams from the house got much worse after the young man moved in. With a smile on his face, he ends the call and calls his office manager to finalize the plan. With a smile, he says to tell the village chief that he won't need the exorcism because he'll catch the ghost himself. Our protagonist explains that it was easy to guess the young man was Lee Jae-hwan, and that's why he requested an emergency search warrant. Lee Jung-woo interrupts him and asks why he stopped talking, and our protagonist thinks he can't talk about his powers. And so, he says it was just a prosecutor's intuition, and his friend finds the answer very suspicious and strange. The scene shifts to the evidence recovered from the professor's house, which proved he was the culprit in the Yu Ah-song case. However, a collection of eyes in jars showed that there were still many cases to be discovered there. And to expose all of the professor's evil, a special investigation team was formed at the Dongnam branch. Sometime later, the two friends celebrate with a toast and 2 bottles of beer at sunset. Our protagonist thanks Detective Jeong for his help, and compliments him on the impressive takedown he performed on the criminal. The older man says it was our protagonist who convinced him not to give up on the day he thought about quitting everything. With a serious look, the detective prepares to confess something very important to the young prosecutor. He reveals that the culprit sent a threatening letter with the victim's ring, and that's why he got very scared and wanted to give up. However, holding the ring in his hand, he says that in the end, he just couldn't abandon the case. A memory comes to his mind of the day the boy begged him to stay, but an emergency made him leave. In the past, he promised the boy he would make it up to him next time and asked him to behave well. To calm him down, the detective says he bought the ring the boy wanted so much, and he was very happy with the gift. The man remembers the boy leaving with a big smile on his face, waving at him from a distance. But right after that day, he saw the boy's body on a gurney, and the image has never left his mind. The detective reveals he can't forget the scene for 10 years, and that the guilt has always haunted him. With a clenched fist, he says it took a long time, but finally he can let the boy rest in peace. With that, our protagonist agrees, because now justice has finally been served for poor Yu Ah-sung. With tears in his eyes, the detective thanks the young prosecutor for all the help he gave on the case. The scene shifts to the Gangwon District Prosecutor's office on a sunny and peaceful day. On the other end of the line, Shin Jong-sung celebrates that his life in the countryside is finally coming to an end. But Kim Yoon-hwan warns him to keep Kim Seo-jin on a leash, as he's been making a lot of noise lately. The colleague continues his complaint, saying our protagonist has been acting like a loose cannon out there. He scoffs, saying the young man has been acting like Sherlock Holmes, trying to solve every cold case he finds. Kim Yoon-won questions if he's actually solved anything, and Shin Jong-sung says the sister case was pure luck. He says he heard our protagonist arrested someone the day before, but that it won't lead to anything. But suddenly, he stops talking and says he'll call back because the branch chief and the chief prosecutor were in the elevator. In the elevator, the chief prosecutor praises our protagonist and says they found a real winner this time. With that, the older man says to leave the interviews to Kim Seo-jin, and Shin Jong-sung is shocked by the news. With a smile, the superior says that with this, they can finally show those suits in Seoul what they're made of. Shin Jong-sung is in shock, as he can't believe our protagonist solved such an important cold case like that. He remains in denial and wonders how the young man managed to unravel such an old and complex case all by himself. Furious, he decides he needs to inform Kim Yoon-hwan about the situation, as he can't just let things be. But at that moment, Lee So-hee approaches and greets him with a very casual good morning. The young woman congratulates him on his transfer to Seoul and wishes him and our protagonist a good trip. The young man is confused, and she reveals that she decided to stay there because she was also appointed to the main office. The elevator door closes, and the colleague is completely shocked by the young woman's revelation. He can't believe she decided to stay in Dongnim even though she had the chance to go to Seoul. Shin Jong-sung thinks that to change a finalized order, you'd need someone very powerful behind it. He can't believe the young woman has such a strong connection and wonders what the heck is going on. The scene shifts to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office, showing the prosecution headquarters. Inside, someone knocks on an office door, preparing to enter and have an important conversation. In the room was Senior Prosecutor Jo Woo-jae, who was the right-hand man of Kim Young-jun, our protagonist's uncle. Soon after, Kim Yoon-hwan enters, and the older man tells him to drop the formalities and make himself comfortable. With the remote in his hand, he asks if the young man remembers the Dongnam kidnapping case from 10 years ago. The television shows the news that a suspect was arrested after 10 years, thanks to a reinvestigation. Jo Woo-jae comments that Dongnam is where that kid is, and Kim Yoon-hwan confirms that he handled the case. The young man gets annoyed because our protagonist solved 2 cases and Shin Jong-sung still hasn't called back. At this, Jo Woo-jae warns him that even a dog needs a lesson and that he should never get ahead of his owner. Kim Yoon-hwan agrees with a forced smile and says he'll keep that in mind for the future. The older man puts out his cigarette and says they can deal with that later, because the important thing now was something else. He explains that the star of the show is the one who gets on the podium and holds the press conference to take all the credit. With a smile, he says our protagonist wouldn't hold the press conference because a trainee would never step in front of his seniors. Kim Yoon-hwan agrees and concludes that in the end, our protagonist just did the hard work for someone else to take the credit. However, looking at the television, the two are completely shocked by what they see on the screen, because the one at the podium was our protagonist, introducing himself as Prosecutor Kim Seo-jin from the Dongnam branch. Furious, Jo Woo-jae slams the table and yells if the idiots in Dongnam have gone crazy for handing the press conference over to a kid. With the news spreading, the names of Yu Ah-sung and Prosecutor Kim Seo Jin rise to the top of internet searches. In the comments, people are shocked by the case and even praise our protagonist's looks amidst the chaos. Seeing all the buzz, Kim Hyun-won gets furious that his cousin is getting all the media attention. Meanwhile, our protagonist walks down the office hallway, completely oblivious to his cousin's anger. Suddenly, a hand touches his shoulder, and a voice calls him, interrupting his thoughts for a moment. It was his superiors who congratulate him on the great work, completely changing the mood at the Dongnam branch. With a smile, our protagonist thinks that this is just the beginning of the storm he's about to unleash on his uncle, Kim Young-jun. At that moment, he receives a message from his friend Jung-woo, who is waiting for him in the front parking lot. Not understanding why, he walks toward the exit, wondering what his friend suddenly wanted with him. But as he opens the door, he's caught off guard by a bright light and realizes he's not alone outside. A crowd of reporters surrounds him with flashes, asking what the secret is to solving such difficult cases. One of the journalists then points to his shoulder and asks about the bird that was perched there. Not understanding a thing, our protagonist is startled by the small bird and yells, completely surprised. In front of the cameras, he tries to get rid of the bird while the reporters capture the whole funny scene. From a distance, Jung-woo films everything with a smile and says he's going to post it on YouTube to get revenge for a lie. From his office, the chief of the Dongnam branch watches all the commotion of reporters surrounding his new prosecutor. With a smile, he comments that seeing Kim Seo Jin reminds him of the old days when he fought for a just society. And so, he says that his prosecutor's blood, which he thought had run dry, is boiling again with all this excitement. Beside him, a man named Kim Kwon-young says that the opportunity he had abandoned has finally arrived and it's time to go back to Seoul. At this, the branch chief gives a wicked smile and asks the other man to prepare a scenario for him. The scene shifts to a restaurant, where the prosecutors make a toast to celebrate recent events. That dinner was a welcome party for our protagonist and Lee So-hee, as well as a celebration for the new investigation team. On the table, a wide variety of high-quality sashimi is served to all those present at the celebration. Seo Jaeyoung thinks that in his past life, he could never afford something like this, but today he's going to eat everything. With chopsticks in hand, our protagonist prepares to grab a piece of fish, but someone interrupts him. Kim Kwon-young, the head of the 4th Criminal Division, offers him a drink and welcomes him to his team. As he fills the glass, he praises him for solving 2 important cases, and the young man says it was just luck. Faced with the praise, our protagonist takes the bottle and offers to pour a drink for his new boss as well. Kim Kwon-young raises his glass with a smile and says he's looking forward to working with the young man. And so, the two make a toast, and our protagonist says the pleasure is all his to work on the team. Suddenly, a glint appears in his eyes, as he understands what's happening behind the scenes. In a memory, he sees the list of the special investigation team for the Lee Jae-won killer case. The branch chief reveals that he put the young man's name on the list, but he has other plans for him. Kim Kwon-young questions if he's going to steal the rookie's credit, but the chief assures him he'll get what he deserves. However, the plan is to have our protagonist secretly investigate a man named Park Sang-young. The chief approaches and asks him to come to his office the next day to discuss an urgent case. With that, Kim Kwon-young tells him not to think about work and just enjoy the celebration party. After the conversation, he takes out his phone to look up the name Park Sang-young and find out who he is. The result shows a young manager at Hongji Construction, and our protagonist finds the face familiar. Looking at the photo, it clicks in his mind, as he finally remembers where he saw that man before. It turns out that the so-called manager was none other than a close friend of his cousin, Kim Hyun-won. Seo Jaeyoung takes a sip of his drink, wondering what a guy connected to his cousin has done. With a newfound determination, he slams the glass on the counter, as an idea has just come to his mind. A victorious smile appears on his face, as this could be the perfect chance to take down his enemies. But just as he was about to eat, someone interrupts him by yelling his name, making him stop in his tracks. It was his coworkers, who were yelling for him to join their table and drink with everyone. The next morning, a bird sings at the window, marking the beginning of another workday for him. Arriving at the office, our protagonist greets his boss, Kim Kwon-young, who is already waiting for him for the meeting. The older man then tells him to sit down and informs him that 2 more people will be joining them in the conversation. As he waits in silence, knocks on the door announce the arrival of the other guests for the meeting. Soon after, the door opens, revealing the shoes of a man and a woman entering the boss's office. With a smile on his face, a man asks if the boss called for them, with a woman right behind him. Our protagonist recognizes them both on the spot, seeming a little surprised by their presence there. It was Lee So-hee and Prosecutor Jae-dong-min, a veteran with 5 years of experience at the office. With everyone present, Kim Kwon-young invites them to sit down and begin the important meeting. Jae-dong-min introduces himself to Seo Jun-jong and, with a smile, calls him a very lucky guy. Seeing the young man's reaction, the man apologizes and says he said that out of pure envy of his recent success. But our protagonist immediately senses the sarcasm in his words, as it didn't seem like a sincere compliment. Apparently, the rumors that Jae-dong-min was a good person were false, and he was a pretty unlucky guy. Kim Kwon-young takes a sip of coffee and asks everyone to pay attention, as what he's about to say is confidential. The boss asks our protagonist to just put his name on the special investigation team and handle other cases. With that, Kim Kwon-young slams his mug on the table and gets straight to the point, asking if anyone there knows Park Sang-young. Everyone falls silent, and our protagonist thinks it's the Park Sang-young case, and that it was a good thing he investigated beforehand. Jae-dong-min says he's never heard the name, but Lee So-hee reveals she knows manager Park Sang-young from Hyungja Construction. Seo Jun-jong explains that the construction company became the preferred bidder for a project and that the manager is at the center of it all. Given the answer, the boss stands up and, with a smile, confirms that's exactly why he called them for that meeting. With that, he drags a chair with wheels across the office floor to get closer to a whiteboard that was there. Kim Kwon-young reveals that he received information that there were unfair instructions during the project's bidding process. From there, he points to the suspect's photo and says the three of them will be investigating the Park Sang-young case from now on. The boss warns them to investigate the case quietly because the dust from a construction site disappears with just a little water. Jae-dong-min says he will lead the team, but plays humble and questions if he can lead such incredible juniors. After the meeting, the office door closes with a thud, and the three leave the room to begin the investigation. In the hallway, Jae-dong-min turns to the two and, with a smile, says he's looking forward to working with them on the case. And so, he suggests they investigate the case individually and then compare the overlapping parts. With a smile, he pats our protagonist's shoulder to seal the deal between the new investigation team. Jae-dong-min calls him lucky and challenges him to see if his luck continues, and our protagonist gets very annoyed with the provocation. Upon being touched, he feels something strange, and his psychometry suddenly activates, leaving him surprised by the new vision. The vision shows Jae-dong-min's hand all distorted, revealing the conversation the man was having at that moment. On the call, he arranges to meet Park Sang-young at a cafe near the Royal Chalice Apartments at 7 in the evening. Park Sang-young says the place has curtains and is safe because it's not frequented by legal professionals. The man then walks away and says not to worry because Hyung will help resolve the whole situation. Our protagonist understands that Jae-dong-min is conspiring with Park Sang-young and that they are meeting tonight. Lee So-hee approaches and comments that for some reason, she felt a strange chill at that moment. He then asks about Jae-dong-min, and the young woman reveals that he's famous for being a womanizer with many victims. With a disgusted expression, she says she hates guys like him who are trash and don't take responsibility for their actions. The young woman then clicks her tongue and tells him not to dig too deep into the matter, as it's not worth the effort. He suggests they divide the investigation, but Lee So-hee finds the idea very inefficient for the case. The young man explains that if they divide the tasks, they'll finish faster, and she wonders why Jae-dong-min suggested the opposite. With a confident smile, our protagonist says they should investigate this together to find out the truth. From there, he arranges to meet Lee So-hee after work and heads to his new office, room number 507. Our protagonist then arrives at the door of his new office, number 507, holding a box with coffees for everyone. With a quick motion, he turns the doorknob and opens the door to finally meet his new investigation team. Upon entering the room, a man greets him and introduces himself as investigator Lim Jeong-tik, who was already working. An officer named Do Min-ji also introduces herself, and our protagonist introduces himself as Kim Seo Jin, offering coffee. Lim Jeong-tik jokes that this is poison to make them work, and the young man confirms, saying his hobby is working overtime. Faced with the response, the two are completely startled and nervously ask if that was just a joke. With a smile on his face, our protagonist reassures them, saying he likes to have a life outside of work and to drink the coffee. And so, the three drink the beverage, and Lim Jeong-tik thinks that this first meeting was full of lies and deception. The scene then shifts to the evening, showing the facade of the cafe where our protagonist arranged to meet Lee So-hee. The place was quite peculiar, with a giant teddy bear and very flashy and unique decor. Inside, Lee So-hee questions him about why he chose such a strange cafe for their meeting. Our protagonist thinks it's because Park Sang-young and Jae-dong-min are meeting there, but he can't reveal that yet. With that, he just explains that he did a little research on Park Sang Young suspects political involvement in the case. But as he's explaining, Lee So Hee's cell phone suddenly starts ringing with a call from her mother. The young woman apologizes for the interruption, but our protagonist tells her to answer it, as it could be something very important. The young woman then dismisses the call and says it's just her mom checking if she's eaten and that she'll call back later. With that, Lee So He continues the conversation and reveals that Park Sang-young is a friend of Kim Yun-won and asks what that has to do with anything. Seo Jun-jang then reveals that Kim Yun-won and Jae Dong-min are also very close, leaving the young woman completely shocked. And so, he shows a photo from Kim Yun-won's private social media with the two of them and points to the comments. Lee So He remembers that Jae Dong-min said he didn't know Park Sang-young and asks how he got access to the private account. Faced with the question, our protagonist reveals that Kim Yun-won is his cousin, and the young woman is speechless at the news. She starts to say that if they are relatives, but the young man interrupts her with an attentive look at the cafe's door. Suddenly, our protagonist pushes her head down hard, making the young woman's face hit the pastries on the table. At that moment, Park Sang-young and Jae Dong-min enter the cafe, and one of them comments that the place is very private and discreet. The other man then points to the curtains and comments that it must be exciting to see couples hiding there. With his hand on her head, our protagonist reveals that the men who just entered are the targets of their investigation. Lee So He understands the situation and, with her face covered in sweets, tells him to take his hand off, and the young man offers a napkin. Our protagonist then says they need to move to the next seat and get the evidence, and she asks if he's going to record. The young woman reminds him that recording third-party conversations without consent is completely illegal and cannot be done. With a confident smile, he says it would be illegal if it were a wiretap, but not if it's accidentally recorded on a date. Lee So He gets all flustered at the idea of a date, and our protagonist tells her to clean her face and that he'll go first. Walking to the other table, he thinks that since the place has no soundproofing, they absolutely cannot get caught. With that, Jae Dong-min suddenly stands up and says he needs to go to the restroom for a moment to relieve himself. Our protagonist starts to sweat with the situation and wonders if his plan is going to fail right now. He's terrified at the idea of being caught by Jae Dong-min right in the middle of their secret operation. However, the older man just stares at him for a second and continues on his way without recognizing him. Relieved, our protagonist takes a deep breath and thinks that Park Sang-young looks like a complete gigolo. Jae Dong-min then apologizes for interrupting the flow of the conversation and tells the other to continue. Back at the table, the two listen to the conversation, and the man asks why Park Sang-young is a suspect in the case. With the phone recording, Jae Dong-min questions if he has ever bribed a public official in his life. Park Sang-young scoffs at the question and says the blame lies with the slow officials, not him. Hearing the conversation, Lee So He gets furious and thinks the man is complete trash and a huge scumbag. Jae Dong-min pressures him and asks what he did for his company to be chosen for the project. The young man gets annoyed and asks if this is an interrogation, but the other says he just needs to know what he did. With that, Park Sang-young confesses that he gave money to a councilman and even set him up with a girl. With that, Park Sang-young ends the conversation and tells Jae Dong-min to keep him updated on the prosecutor's next steps. The older man is shocked by the audacity, but the other promises that if everything ends well, he'll get him out of that exile. With a mocking smile, Park Sang-young asks if he thought he didn't know the reason he got close to Yoon-won. Jae Dong-min grips his glass tightly, and the other reminds him that he's close to him and can speak well of him to help him out. And so, he tells the man not to worry and to trust him, and Park Sang-young praises the prosecutor's speed. From there, the two leave together down the cafe's hallway after sealing the deal between them. Back at the table, our protagonist stops the recording on his phone after capturing the entire conversation of the two. He then says he already has an idea of what's happening, and Lee So He asks how he knew they would come there. With a confident smile, our protagonist reveals he accidentally overheard Jae Dong-min's phone conversation. The young woman then wonders if he's just a lucky guy, but he replies that luck is also a skill. Lee So He returns to the case and suggests they investigate the connection between Park Sang-young and the councilman he mentioned. Faced with the suggestion, the young woman is confused by the situation and asks our protagonist what they should do now. With a mysterious smile on his face, he simply replies that the solution to their problem is very simple. The scene then shifts to a restaurant, and he says they just need to stir up the dust again to solve the case. A get-together dinner for the Dongnam County Orchestra was happening at the location, with many people present. Inside, Councilman Wee Jun-sang was harassing a young woman, saying she was from his hometown. With his hand on her shoulder, the older man tells her to think of him as her appa and to feel comfortable. The young woman is completely uncomfortable with the situation, but the man tells her to call him Appa at least once. With that, Wee Junsang says the girls from his town are the prettiest and asks for her number so they can go out. The woman has a disgusted expression and bites her lip in anger at being in that situation with that man. Suddenly, a young man intervenes and tells the councilman that he seems to have had a little too much to drink. Faced with the interruption, the older man turns to the young man with an expression of surprise and disbelief. With a look of hatred, Wee Junsang curses the young man and says he can't rid the room. The young man's boss then stands up and scolds him, telling him to apologize to the councilman immediately. Wee Junsang stands up saying he's lost his appetite and tells the culture chief to get rid of the young man while he goes to the restroom. The scene then shifts to a restroom with a fan on the wall, showing where the councilman was heading. Inside, the older man washes his hands and complains about the young man who dared to lecture him. Suddenly, the man hears a strange noise and sees a mop blocking the door of the stall he was in. Not understanding what was happening, he turns to the door and asks what that is in the way. And to his surprise, the one there was our protagonist, who greets him with a mocking smile. With a confident smile, our protagonist introduces himself as Kim Seo Jin and says he has something urgent to ask. Upon hearing the name, the councilman recognizes him from the news and stammers, asking what brings him there. Without beating around the bush, Seojun Jaeyoung asks if he knows Park Sang-young, and the man is shocked by the question. Wee Junsang panics and wonders if that crazy Park Sang-young got caught and that's why he's there. However, he tries to calm down and thinks that maybe our protagonist is just bluffing without any real evidence. With a fake smile, he denies knowing Park Sang-young and says he has no idea what the young man is talking about. But our protagonist tells him to stop acting and says there are signs of bribery between the two in the case. Wee Junsang then freaks out and accuses him of spreading rumors to get a better position in the prosecution. Angrily, the councilman tries to push him, but our protagonist holds him firmly and prevents him from passing. The man then tries to open the stall door but can't, and our protagonist watches him with a smile. Suddenly, the culture chief approaches and asks the councilman if he's leaving the restaurant already. And so Wee Junsang takes the chance and leaves, yelling at the man not to make a scene there. The people in the restaurant are confused, and a woman comments that the man finally left, and that she feels relieved. At that moment, our protagonist passes by the young man who defended the woman, and the young man is startled by his presence. Walking through the restaurant, he stands out in the crowd, and a woman recognizes him as the famous prosecutor from the news. Another woman whispers the nickname, Snow White Prosecutor, and our protagonist turns to her. He approaches and asks if she was referring to him and where she got that strange nickname. At that moment, our protagonist touches the woman's shoulder, and his psychometry ability is activated. He has a vision of the past and sees the councilman harassing the young woman and inviting her to rest with him. With a wicked smile, the man threatens her, saying that if she doesn't go, the other band members might be cut. Back in the present, the woman apologizes, and our protagonist realizes how uncomfortable she was. He then steps away and makes a call, confirming that the vision he had happened at that very moment. On the phone, he reports that Councilman Wee Junsang has started to move and that the plan is working. And so, he says to follow the man carefully because he will try to clean up all the evidence that night. In the car, Lim Jeongtaek understands that the coffee was poison, and that now he'll have a life with guaranteed dinner. Our protagonist then calls the young woman who is being harassed and tells her to be careful and call if anything happens. With that, he ends the call and steps away for a moment to give the woman space to calm down. He then approaches and formally introduces himself as Kim Seo Jin and asks if she has a moment to talk. Given the woman's reaction, he realizes she's scared and that something very serious happened between her and the councilman. With a nervous look, the young woman asks why he wants to talk to her, and he suggests she talk to Lee Seo. If it's easier. Our protagonist assures her that her anonymity will be protected, and Lee Seo, he approaches to help. With a gentle touch, he passes the woman's hand to Lee Seo, so she feels safer and more confident. The young woman then comforts her and tells her not to be afraid and to tell everything, as they will help her resolve the situation. Given the support, the woman musters her courage and decides she will tell the whole truth about what happened to her. In a cafe, she asks if her anonymity will really be guaranteed, and Lee Seo, he confirms on the spot. Outside, our protagonist waits and promises himself that he will protect the woman's identity. While waiting, he decides to look up his new nickname, Snow White Prosecutor, on the internet. And to his surprise, he discovers that his friend Jung Woo posted a video with the title, Creepy Parallel Theory. The video compared his ability to control birds with Snow White's and already had 800,000 views. Our protagonist gets furious and wonders who in the world would do something like that to a friend. At that moment, Lee Seo. He comes out of the cafe and says she's finished the conversation and that he can go in. The young woman compliments him for being surprisingly thoughtful, and he explains that he thought she didn't want him to listen. With that, he asks if the woman has already left, and Lee Seo. He says she left through the back door for safety. The prosecutor then reveals that the councilman didn't just harass that young woman, but also other young women in the orchestra. But she says that it ends now because the woman will gather the victims and file a formal complaint against the man. Lee Seo, he gets furious and says she can't forgive men who commit crimes like that just because they have power. With that, our protagonist stands up and calls her to leave, but she asks where they are going now. With a confident smile, he says he needs to teach Councilman Wee Jun-sang a lesson and shows a message on his phone. The scene shifts to a forest at night, where our protagonist and his team find a suspicious man. In Lee Seo, his hands was a completely burned hard drive, which was the evidence they needed. Lim Jong-tik explains that 10 minutes after the councilman went into his house, the man came out terrified, looking around. He says he followed the suspicious man and caught him burning the hard drive, and the young man apologizes on the spot. Our protagonist then asks if that is the councilman's hard drive, and Lim Jong-tik nods. The older man explains that the councilman told him to swap the hard drives and that he had no choice but to obey. Seo Jun-gaung questions why he burned the hard drive since the data was so vital to the case. The young man explains that the councilman told him to hide the hard drive until the investigation was over and to burn it if he got caught. With that, he begs our protagonist to keep what happened a secret, and the young man agrees. Lee Seo, he analyzes the hard drive and asks if it's possible to recover the data, as it looks very damaged. She suggests sending the drive to the main office, but our protagonist finds the idea too risky. With a determined look, he says their opponent is a politician and it's better to act in the worst-case scenario. Lee Seo, he questions if he can do something like that, and our protagonist says that obviously, he won't be the one doing the work. With a confident smile, he takes out his phone and says he knows the right person to solve that problem. From there, he sends a message to a contact named Jaeyoung Yu, asking for help with the damaged hard drive. And so, the scene shifts to the Dongnam police station, where the help he needed was waiting for him. Inside, an officer named Park analyzes the hard drive and says he'll only know if he can recover the data after he tries. Jung Woo introduces him as the best expert at the station, and Officer Park says it might be possible if the internal damage isn't severe. The expert warns that it will take about 2 hours, and as payment, he asks for fried chicken, which Jung Woo immediately starts ordering on his phone. At this, Officer Park asks to be notified when the food arrives and begins to analyze the state of the hard drive. Leaving there, Jung Woo thanks our protagonist for saving him in some way. The friend then jokes that this makes them even for the Snow White Prosecutor nickname, leaving the young man confused. With a smile, Jung Woo apologizes for the joke and says he just wanted the best for him as they both joke about the delivery. Back at the office, Officer Park hands over a flash drive and explains that the damage was minimal and he recovered everything, including the deleted files. With the files in hand, our protagonist sits at his desk and begins to analyze the folders, which were organized by year. He wonders what's in that little Pandora's box and prepares to click on a file from February 7th. His eyes widen in shock as he finally understands why Wee Jun-sang was so confident and self-assured. The reason for Wee Jun-sang's confidence was his connection to powerful politicians, and in the files, he sees a list of bribes. The list reveals Governor Lee Si-mun and Congressman Il-seep, who was a former judge and now an important politician. He reflects that if the case went to headquarters, Chief Prosecutor Cho-young Jun would use the information for his own career. Our protagonist thinks that with just his status in the flash drive, he can't arrest the two guys because they are too powerful. A memory from his past haunts him, and he understands that if he acts recklessly, he will repeat his miserable fate. And so, he decides to close the case with only Councilman Wee Jun-sang and removes the flash drive from the computer for now. With a confident smile, our protagonist puts the flash drive away, as he will use it as the key to enter the center of power. The scene shifts and Lee Seo he tosses him a coffee, asking if the hard drive was fixed. Seo Jun-jaeyoung lies, saying it didn't work and that he sent it to headquarters, and Lee Seo, he laments that nothing is easy. Suddenly Ji Dong-min approaches and, with a smile, asks if all his juniors were already there. With a superior air, the man invites them to a meeting that night. As they've been busy investigating the case, he tells them to bring everything they've discovered, and says he will share his own information with the two of them. Our protagonist just watches him leave, knowing that he's only going to tell everything to Park Sang-young. Faced with the situation, Lee Seo, he asks what they are going to do, and the young man says that for now, They will just listen to what he has to say. The young woman then questions him about what they'll do after listening, and with a smile, he says he'll think about it when the time comes. At the meeting, Jae Dong-min says that Park Sang-young gave money to the councilman, but since it was declared, it can't be called a bribe. Chief Kim Kwon-young becomes thoughtful, and the man explains that the money was registered as a completely legitimate political donation. Faced with the situation, Kim Kwon-young turns and asks Lee Seo what she discovered in her part of the case investigation. The young woman reveals that several public officials received gift cards from friends who happened to work for Haeungji Construction. At this, Jae Dong-min sighs in frustration, as he knows that could be a problem because of a specific country law. The law punishes anyone who receives more than 1 million won at once, but Lee Seo, he says they can receive vouchers up to 6 times. Kim Kwon-young seems irritated and asks if she needs to explain every detail, but the prosecutor isn't finished with her report yet. Jae Dong-min explains that the construction company gave the vouchers to employees who moved, and they gifted them to acquaintances who were in the government. With a victorious smile, he says the main point is that the officials who received the vouchers have nothing to do with the business. Our protagonist thinks that these scumbags are experienced, as they manage to cover all their tracks very well. He continues to think that every public official who received a gift card, in fact, was not by simple chance. Jae Dong-min reveals that they all previously worked in areas important to the business, such as urban development and tourism. Our protagonist retorts that even without a direct connection, the circumstances already raise a very reasonable suspicion. He continues and says that Wee Jun-sang sponsored 6 congressmen with 5 million won each and suggests following the money trail. Jae Dong-min explodes with anger and, with a clenched fist, tells our protagonist to listen to him carefully, calling him a spoiled brat. He yells that the corporation gave up the project to reduce debt and Haeungji invested to increase its brand value. Our protagonist intervenes and says that's strange because his father has a construction company, and he knows the project wouldn't cause a financial burden. With a cold look, he questions why he keeps defending the project if he knows the whole truth very well. Seo-jun Jaeyoung confronts him and asks if he wanted to escape that place so badly that he would sell himself to them. He then places his phone on the table and reveals the recording of Jae Dong-min's conversation with Park Sang-young. In the audio, Park Sang-young promises to get the man out of exile if he keeps the prosecution's progress under control. Park Sang-young reminds him that he's close to Yoon Won and can arrange a spot on the team he's putting together. Given the promise, Jae Dong-min accepts the deal and tells the other not to worry and just trust him with everything. With the recording playing on the table, Jae Dong-min is shocked, as he didn't expect his conversation to be recorded. He's terrified and wonders how our protagonist got that recording of their conversation. Jae Dong-min freaks out and says it's a misunderstanding, and that it was our protagonist who set him up. Chief Kim Kwon-young questions him about the so-called misunderstanding, and the man becomes completely desperate. He continues to stammer and says he can explain everything because he was just trying to get information from Park Sang-young. But with a cold look, the chief cuts him off and, with a single word, says that's enough of the charade. And so, Kim Kwon-young tells our protagonist and Lee Seo to leave the room, and they obey immediately. Outside Lee Seo, he watches him close the door and thinks that now Jae Dong-min will get what he deserves. The prosecutor questions if he really needed to play the recording in there, and the young man just stares back at her. Our protagonist just stares at her in silence for a moment without saying a single word about what he just did. The young woman scolds him, saying he should have been more careful, because now it looks like they staged a targeted attack. She warns him that if he gets a reputation as a rookie who takes down veterans, he will be hated by everyone in the office. With a confident smile, our protagonist says she's right and that obviously, he had something in mind. He reassures her that this will never happen, and she questions why he's so sure of himself. With that, he asks if she knows the reason the chief was exiled to Dongnam, and she becomes very curious. Our protagonist reveals that a few years ago, a chief prosecutor was caught in a bribery scandal involving a contractor. With a serious look, he asks her if she knows who was responsible for catching that chief prosecutor, and she is shocked. And so, he reveals that it was none other than their chief, Kim Kwon-young, who was labeled a traitor and exiled there. Given the revelation, he says the chief understands their situation and would never let them go through the same thing he did. With a smile, he concludes that the chief will probably get rid of Jae Dong-min and end things very quietly. He explains that to avoid causing a scene, the chief will use Prosecutor Lee Mong-soo to do the dirty work for him. With a smile on his face, he reveals that the chief will just tell the other to clean up the mess, and thus resolve the whole situation. The scene cuts back to the restaurant where Chief Kim Kwon-young is eating while thinking about how to solve the problem. With that, Lee Myung-soo guarantees he'll make Jae-dong-min resign discreetly without causing any scandal. At this, Lee Seo, he is shocked and wonders if our protagonist is some kind of psychic for getting everything right. Lee Myung-soo then turns to the two with a serious expression and prepares to give an important warning. And so, he tells the two to forget everything that happened because only the chiefs and they know the truth. Kim Kwan-yong raises his glass and tells everyone to just eat and forget what happened to avoid trouble. From there, the four make a toast to seal the deal and ensure the secret will be kept among them. As time passes, several empty bottles accumulate on the table, showing that it was a very long night. The result is that Lee Myung-soo gets completely wasted and Lee Seo-hee laughs at the scene, unable to contain herself. Later, Kim Kwan-yong calls our protagonist and apologizes but tells him to drop the case for good. The chief explains that the information leaked because of Jae-dong-min and that the dust from the case has already settled there. But with a determined look, our protagonist says he can resolve the situation despite the problems. Soo Jung-gyeong reveals that he wants to turn Park Sang-young's voice into a scream and asks to finish the case. Faced with his determination, the chief smiles and says the young man reminds him of himself, so he'll let him try. However, he warns him that if he's going to do it, he should go all the way and finish the scumbag off once and for all. Our protagonist reflects that since there are people above the law, he will no longer play fair in this life. With a wicked smile, he reveals that the first method he chose for his revenge is very simple. So, he's going to use trash to take out the trash and wonders if he can start the big cleanup now. From there, he arrives at an office and, with a smile, greets a woman who is startled by his presence. With a smile on his face, he reveals he's there to see Congressman Il-seep, and the woman panics. Our protagonist ignores the secretary and enters the room, finding the congressman playing golf in the middle of the office. The woman then approaches and announces him as a visitor, and the young man introduces himself as Prosecutor Kim Seo Jin. At this, the congressman tries to dismiss him, saying he's busy, but our protagonist says he'll have to make time. With a confident smile, he says that if the man wants to receive his nomination safely, he'd better listen to him. The scene then shifts to the two sitting on a sofa, while a cup of tea is served on the coffee table. Our protagonist reveals that Wai Jun-sang kept a pocket diary with all his expenses detailed. The congressman is furious because the elections are approaching and asks who else knows about that diary. With a smile on his face, he assures him that no one else knows, because if they did, the prosecution would have called him. Seeing that he's cornered, the man looks at him with suspicion and asks what he really wants with this. The congressman then laughs and offers a transfer to Seoul, thinking the young man just wanted to get out of Dongnam. But with a confident look, our protagonist says he's the one who will be sending the congressman to Seoul, not the other way around. The older man is completely shocked and speechless at the audacity of the young prosecutor before him. With his hand on the arm of the sofa, he asks who's sending whom where, not believing what he just heard. And so, he freaks out in anger and stands up, yelling at the arrogant young man to reveal who is backing him. With that, our protagonist reveals that his trump card is Jo Sun-bong, a very powerful member of the National Assembly. From there, he slides an envelope across the table and explains that the man has an excessive love for his son. At this, the congressman opens the envelope and is completely shocked by the information inside. Our protagonist reveals that Jo Sun-bong's son wrote a paper on biotechnology and got into university. He continues the explanation and shows that the young man had bad grades, was discharged from the army, and still managed to get a good job. The older man asks how he investigated all that, but our protagonist says the most important thing is something else. With that, he reveals that if the congressman leaks that information, he will be able to advance in politics. The older man says he'll think about it, but our protagonist knows that because he's greedy, he won't take long to answer. And so, the congressman accepts the proposal and asks what he wants in return, and the young man says for now, he wants nothing. With a victorious smile, our protagonist thinks that what he wants has already begun, as he will use the congressman as his puppet. The older man says he can't accept it for free, and that he would like to give him a small gift in return. The congressman then asks what he would like him to do with Councilman Wai Jun-sang as a gift. The scene shifts to the congressman's hand crushing 2 walnuts with force, showing his determination. In front of Wai Jun-sang, he questions if the man was writing a diary, and the other is very confused. With that, he reveals that he heard a rumor that his name was in the diary, and the councilman starts to sweat. Desperate, Wai Jun-sang throws himself on the floor and begs the congressman to forgive him for what he did. But the older man tells him to confess that he accepted a bribe from Park Sang-young to close the case. The councilman continues to beg for forgiveness and, in his desperation, drops a pile of papers on the floor. Upon seeing the documents, he's startled as he realizes that was the proof of all his crimes. It turns out the papers were about the money he embezzled and the inside information he had. The congressman reveals that in politics, you can't trust anyone, and that's why he watched him the whole time. And so, he threatens him and asks if he wants to see his daughter get married or rot in prison for 10 years. With that, he tells him to go quietly, hand in hand with Park Sang-young, so they both pay together. The scene shifts to a parking lot where Park Sang-young is being arrested and yells, asking if they know who he is. He continues to yell, identifying himself and asking if they think they'll get away with this. Faced with the scandal Lee Seo, he gets annoyed and, with a cold look, tells the man to shut up for a moment. As the men take him away, the prosecutor watches the scene with a very serious expression on her face. Lee Seo, he questions where he's going, and our protagonist says he needs to go to Seoul for a moment. With a lollipop in her hand, the young woman asks if he's a child, and he says he'll be back tomorrow and asks her to take care of Wee Jun-sang. The prosecutor then says she has a favor to ask, and our protagonist approaches with a very serious look. And so, he tells her to do whatever the man wants because, either way, things won't go as he plans. Suddenly, Park Sang-young remembers the young man at the cafe and realizes it was he who set all this up against him. With that, our protagonist waves and says goodbye, asking the prosecutor to take care of everything there while he's away. Lee Seo, he is confused and wonders what he meant by do whatever he wants as she sucks on her lollipop. The scene shifts to interrogation room number 302, where Park Sang-young was being interrogated. With a headache, he says he'll discuss the case when his lawyer arrives and complains about the alcohol in his system. The man then complains that this is an overreaction because the donation was legitimate, and now he's being treated like a criminal. Lee Seo, he reveals that Wee Jun-sang confessed everything and that the boxes exchanged at the golf course were recorded by the cameras. The young man tries to defend himself, saying it was just a gift, but the prosecutor says the councilman already confessed it was money. Desperate, he questions the principle of presumption of innocence and asks if she's acting solely based on what the other said. The young woman pressures him and asks how long he thinks he can deny it, but the man decides to make a call. At this, prosecutor Lee Seo, he becomes thoughtful about our protagonist's words. A memory comes to her mind of him telling her to do whatever the man wanted, because the plan wouldn't work out. With a sigh, the young woman finally understands what he meant and prepares to follow the plan. And so, she places the cell phone on the table, as at least the man understands the message she wants to send. With the phone in his hand, Park Sang-young calls Kim Yun-won and says he was dragged to the prosecution. Lee Seo, he scoffs in her thoughts because the man was just drinking at the bar moments ago and not busy. Park Sang-young then asks him to tell his father that he wanted to meet next week for a talk. On the other end of the line, Kim Yun-won repeats Park Sang-young's name with a very serious and unfriendly tone. With that, he asks why he would want to meet his father, and the young man is completely shocked by the response. It turns out that the one on the call was Kim Young-jun, and the man stammers, calling him, "Your Excellency." The scene shifts to Chief Prosecutor Kim Young-jun's house, where our protagonist arrives for an important visit. With a smile on his face, he reveals he has something very important to tell the older man. Upon entering the room, Kim Young-jun asks if his son, Kim Yun-won, has arrived for their talk. Suddenly, the cousin appears and greets our protagonist, saying it's been a long time since they've seen each other. Kim Yun-won then sits down and scoffs, saying the young man has become a star and asks for some of his luck. With a smile on his face, Kim Young-jun questions the reason for the visit so late at night. Our protagonist then takes out his phone and says that since his cousin is there, everything is perfect because he has something to tell him. From there, he slides the phone across the table, revealing that Park Sang-young approached Kim Yun-won to escape exile. Faced with the revelation, the cousin starts to sweat, as his friend wanted a spot on his new team. Seo Jun-jang explains that Park Sang-young is being held for bribery and is using his uncle's name as a bargaining chip. Kim Yun-won freaks out and tells our guy to back off because his friend has a powerful protector, his own father. But our protagonist shakes his head and says his cousin is too kind to get rid of trash like Park Sang-young. With a confident smile, he says he was worried and went to see his uncle before things got worse because, after all, they are family. Kim Yun-won is furious with the mockery and tries to lunge forward, but his father stops him with a firm and authoritative gesture. With a dark look, the older man questions his son for daring to spread his name around like that. Terrified, Kim Yun-won tries to stammer an excuse to his father, but the phone on the table starts to ring. The camera focuses on the phone's screen, revealing that the call was from none other than Park Sang-young himself. Upon seeing the name on the screen, the young man turns completely pale with fear, realizing his situation has gotten much worse. With a cold look, Kim Jun tells his son to answer the call on speaker so everyone can hear the conversation. On the other end of the line, Park Sang-young's desperate voice emerges, saying he was just dragged to the prosecution. On the other end of the line, Park Sam-young asks him to give a message to his father, and Kim Yun-won despairs, telling him to shut up. Kim Jun then repeats the young man's name and confirms that his father wants a meeting next week. With a cold look, the older man questions why he would want to meet with his father, and the young man panics. And so, he warns that the other's company will be raided soon, and Park Sang-young is completely shocked. Kim Jun continues the threat and says his funds will be frozen and all his corruption will be exposed in the media. With that, he gives him an ultimatum and tells him to confess and do a few years if he wants his father's company to stay safe. Faced with the threat, Park Sang-young gets the message, and the call is abruptly ended with a thud on the table. Kim Jun then stands up and says he wanted to have dinner with the young man, but now it will be difficult, and our protagonist says it's okay. But as he walks away, the uncle asks him to delete the recording he made of their conversation. With a confident smile on his face, our protagonist turns to the older man with a very calm expression. And so, he takes his phone and, with a smile, says of course he'll delete the recording he made. As he leaves the house, he hears his uncle slapping his cousin and yelling that the people around him are on his level. Outside, our protagonist thinks that a single recording won't touch Kim Yun-won, but it's better to keep it for safety. From there, he saves the recording to the cloud and comments on how convenient the storage function is for him. The scene shifts and a female voice asks for Kim Seo, where he is, and when he's coming back to Dongnam. On the phone, our protagonist says he'll arrive at 4 and that if things get tough to ask Lee Myung-soo for help. With a smile, he apologizes and says he'll hurry as much as he can and asks her to hang on a little longer. He reflects that the reason he hasn't returned to the office yet is because of Congressman Jo San-bong, who has great power. Political reporters say that as long as Jo San-bong is in power, it's impossible for a new figure to emerge in his district. Because of this, our protagonist's plan is to turn Congressman Seep into a sniper to expose the other's corruption. He thinks that if everything goes as planned, he'll put the congressman on the front line. But he knows there can be variables. Because of this, he reveals there's someone he needs to meet today to ensure his plan succeeds. Suddenly, a man arrives and apologizes for being late, and our protagonist understands that he's Jo San-bong's aide. The young man then introduces himself as Prosecutor Kim Seo, and the man introduces himself as Woo Jin-wook, the congressman's aide. Our protagonist reveals that Jo San-bong has two aides, his right-hand man Lee Sang-ju and his left-hand man Woo Jin-wook. However, he knows that Jo San-bong favors Lee Sang-ju and that if he falls, the other would be the next candidate in the line of succession. And so, he chooses Woo Jin-wook for a two-pronged strategy. The congressman will attack from the outside while the aide attacks from the inside. He reflects that this way, not even Congressman Jo San-bong will be able to withstand the attacks. Woo Jin-wook then asks the young man to be brief, as the general election is approaching and he's very busy. With that, the man questions if this is a request or a report, with a very serious look. Woo Jin-wook scoffs, saying blackmail won't work because his boss would retaliate with everything he has. But our protagonist says that's why they hit harder. The man then starts eating and tells the young man to get to the point, and Seo Jaeong wonders if he hasn't eaten in days. Our protagonist says it's nothing like that, and that he only contacted him because he was curious about aide Woo Jin-wook. But the older man doesn't seem to care, and continues to devour the food with great gusto and without stopping. At this, he asks why the young man would be curious about him, and our protagonist offers a drink with a smile. Woo Jin-wook accepts just one glass and inwardly thinks that all this effort is a huge waste of time. Our protagonist thinks that he's met many politicians, but this one is the first easy one to deal with, and that he handles almost all the work. However, he reflects that he doesn't need someone kind and capable, but rather an ambitious person who can win in the end. From there, he questions how long he'll continue like this and if he plans to stay under Jo San-bong's wing forever. At this, the man's expression changes, and he reveals that he's also thinking of leaving his position soon. He says that in the next election, he'll aim for a difficult district and that way, maybe he'll be appointed to the position. But with a firm look in the glass in his hand, the older man says it won't be a waste of money. A wicked smile appears on his face, and he confidently reveals that there is actually a way to get what he wants. Back in the present, our protagonist reflects that the electoral battles that followed were so dirty that it was disgusting just to think about them. With a smile on his face, he thinks that just because a predator hides its claws doesn't mean it's stopped being one. Woo Jin-wook is startled and sees a tiger in front of him, and our protagonist says that because of him, the plan has changed. With that, he slams the bottle on the table and prepares to reveal his true intentions to the man. With a confident smile, he says he'll be direct and that he wants to support Aid Woo-jin, Wook's personal ambitions. Seo-jun Jiang reflects that Al-mil's seat can be taken down at any moment, while Woo-jin Wook is well-liked and capable. With a determined look, he says that with his help, it's more than possible for him to get what he wants, and the man is confused. From there, he introduces himself as the son of the CEO of Jaesong Construction, and the older man is shocked. Woo-jin Wook starts to sweat as he didn't expect that revelation, and our protagonist says he investigated him a little. He confronts him, saying that even though he takes care of everything, Jo Shan-bong plans to hand the district over to Lee Sang-ju. With that, he questions why he's the one leaving if he's the one who cultivated the district for decades, and the other is startled. Woo-jin Wook freaks out in anger and accuses him of asking him to betray his boss after so many years. With a cold look, our protagonist just tells the man to leave without further explanation. Faced with the silence, the older man slams his fist on the table with all his might and yells at the young man to leave. Seo-jun Jiang stands up and says he'll wait for his call because he knows the man doesn't really hate him. But just as he's about to leave, the older man calls him back with a single word. With a serious look, Woo-jin Wook questions why he's doing this and why he wants to help him. With a confident smile, our protagonist says he's helping him because he thinks he can win and nothing more. Woo-jin Wook becomes thoughtful as the young man named Kim Seo has left him completely speechless. He reflects that the prosecutor saw right through what he was hiding, even while enduring humiliations from his boss. And so, he takes a sip of his drink and thinks that this is not the look of an ordinary rookie. With a swift motion, the older man slams his glass on the table with force after making his decision. The scene then shifts to the National Assembly office, where the aide works normally. A man approaches and asks where he was, and if he forgot about the district rounds they had today. Woo-jin Wook denies it and says he made the schedule himself, and that he met someone briefly before returning. The older man warns him that the congressman asked for him earlier, and the young man is a little surprised. With that, the other says he covered for him, and that he needs to make sure his story matches his to avoid trouble. Woo-jin Wook then thanks his colleague Lee Sang-ju for the help he gave while he was out of the office. Suddenly, someone calls for aide Lee Sang-ju in the hallway of their office. The man then walks away and tells Woo-jin Wook to gargle because his breath smells like alcohol from the drink. Woo-jin Wook watches his colleague walk away and thinks that if he betrays them, Lee Sang-ju will have nowhere to go. And so, he decides he can't betray a friend who has suffered alongside him for so long and walks down the hallway. As he fills a glass of water, a voice calls him, and he thinks that if he just endures it quietly, he can find his own path. With the glass in his hand, he turns and wonders what the heck they are talking about on the other side of the room. Faced with the situation, he approaches the door to try to listen to the conversation happening inside. With his hand on the door and sweating, the aide decides that maybe he needs to listen a little more to that conversation. Inside, Lee Sang-ju reveals to the chief that it seems aide Woo-jin Wook was drinking during lunch. At this, Jo Shan-bong freaks out and says he should fire that crazy person on the spot. But the other asks him not to do that yet. With a wicked smile, Lee Sang-ju suggests they use him as a scapegoat until the general election. Outside, Woo-jin Wook is completely shocked to discover that after the election, they are going to replace him with someone else.